Hello, everybody. You're listening to Sleepwalker Radio. If our stories help you sleep or relax, please like, comment, and subscribe. Now close your eyes and let's begin. I was only 12 years old when I went out coon hunting with my uncle that night. It was in the woods of southern Ohio, the kind of woods where trees grow thick and close together, with big trunks that block out the moonlight, making it darker than you'd ever think darkness could be. My uncle always took me along in the fall, saying it was good for a boy to learn how to handle himself at night, how to walk through the brush quietly, how to read a dog's voice when it barked up a tree or followed a scent through the hollow. That night, the air felt cold and damp, like it was holding rain somewhere up above, but there was no wind, not even a breeze. We parked his old Chevy by a gravel turnout along the Tulane Road and let the dogs out. They were big red-boned coonhounds, red as rust under a flashlight beam, with their long floppy ears and thick necks. They barked and howled as soon as they hit the ground, pulling on their leashes, ready to hunt. My uncle clipped their lights on their collars, bright little LED lights that flashed green and blue in the dark, and we walked into the woods. The crunch of dead leaves and sticks under our boots was the only sound at first, mixed with the hounds breathing heavy with excitement. I remember I kept my little .22 rifle slung over my shoulder, barrel pointed down like my uncle always taught me. He carried his .22 Magnum, stepping around fallen trees and brambles like he had been born there. The woods smelled of damp earth, old leaves, and cold air, and I remember feeling a little bit scared, the way I always did when we first went in. But once you get walking for a while and hear the dogs strike a trail, it feels better, like your brain settles into the quiet, waiting for the hunt to start. After maybe half an hour of walking along an old logging trail, the dogs struck scent. Their heads snapped up, noses working fast, tails stiff as boards, and they let out their deep bawling bark, throats wide open as they tore off into the darkness. Their lights bounced along the tree trunks as they ran. My uncle unclipped their leashes quick and said nothing. We just watched them go. I remember thinking how small their lights looked, bobbing through the woods like two little colored fireflies, getting further and further away. We listened to them trail off towards a low ridge about 200 yards ahead. The barking was strong and steady, echoing back at us between the trees. That sound always made my chest tighten in a good way, like I was part of something real and old. We kept walking towards them, moving slow, so we didn't make too much noise. I remember my boots sinking into the wet ground in places, cold mud seeping around the edges of my soles, the smell of it sharp in my nose. The woods were quiet except for the dogs, no wind rustling the branches, just still, deep darkness and those two bawling voices calling out ahead of us. My uncle's headlamp lit up patches of ferns and saplings, glowing pale green against the black woods. Every so often he would check his Garmin tracker to see where the dogs were going. I liked watching him do that, seeing the little orange screen in his big rough hands, hearing the soft beep as he pressed buttons with his thumb. We were getting close to the ridge when it happened. At first I thought I was seeing things. A bright light flickered through the trees in front of us. Not the dogs' lights, not our headlamps, but something bigger, glowing white and blue like lightning. But it wasn't flashing. It was steady, and it was low to the ground, almost like it was sitting in the woods, lighting up the tree trunks in a pale, ghostly shine. My uncle stopped dead in his tracks. I stopped too, staring ahead with my mouth hanging open. The dogs stopped barking at that exact same moment. I didn't even realize it until I heard this whining sound, a scared crying coming from them. I had never heard those dogs sound like that before. They would chase a coon up a tree with a bear 10 feet away and never flinch, but now they were crying like whipped puppies. Then this noise started up. It was deep and humming, almost vibrating in my chest like when a big truck goes by on the road and shakes the windows. It wasn't loud in a blasting way, but it felt heavy, like it pressed down on us from all sides. My teeth started to chatter, even though it wasn't that cold. I could feel my knees wanting to buckle, and it wasn't just fear. It felt like the noise was shaking my bones, like it went through my skin, right into my blood. I tried to look at my uncle, to see what he was doing, but I couldn't turn my head. My eyes were locked straight ahead at that light. Then this fog rolled in. It didn't creep in slow like a morning fog you see on ponds or fields. It came rolling in thick and fast from all directions, curling around the trees and swallowing up the ground. It was cold and damp on my face, and I could barely see my uncle standing 2 feet from me. I heard one of the dogs let out a scream. Not a bark, not a whine, but a terrified scream, and then it went silent again. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't work. It was like I was frozen in place, the cold from the fog sinking into my arms and chest until I felt like I couldn't breathe. All of this happened in what felt like forever, but must have been just a few seconds. Then, as sudden as it started, it was gone. The light blinked out. The humming stopped. The fog vanished like it got sucked back into the ground. I was standing there in the silent black woods, my breath coming out ragged and fast, chest heaving like I'd been running. My uncle was standing next to me, looking around with his mouth open, his headlamp beam shaking side to side. I could hear the dogs again. They weren't barking, though. They were whimpering, low and scared, crawling along the ground with their tails tucked under them. I called out to them without thinking, my voice sounding small and cracked in the cold air. They didn't even come to me right away. They just kept crawling, belly to the ground, ears flat, whining like they wanted to disappear. We walked over to them and clipped their leashes back on. They were shaking so bad their teeth chattered, tongues hanging out like they'd run 100 miles, but their paws and legs weren't muddy like they'd been running. It was like whatever happened just drained every bit of life out of them without them even moving. I remember looking around, trying to find tracks or marks on the trees from the light, but there was nothing. Just the smell of wet leaves and earth, and the sharp tang of fear in my own nose. My uncle didn't say a word. He just turned around and started walking back towards the truck, pulling the dogs with him. I followed close behind, feeling the weight of the rifle on my shoulder, the strap digging into my neck with every step. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting that light to come back, or the fog to roll in again and swallow us up before we could get out. But the woods stayed black and silent. Even the owls and night birds were quiet, like they were hiding too. I could hear the gravel crunch under our boots when we reached the road again. My uncle unlocked the truck fast and tossed his gun in the back seat, then lifted the dogs up into their box. They didn't even resist like they usually did when they didn't want the hunt to end. They just crawled in and laid down silent, eyes wide open and staring straight ahead. We drove back to his house in silence. The heater was blasting, but I couldn't stop shivering. My hands felt like ice blocks resting on my knees. I watched the road pass under the headlights, the dark trees standing guard on both sides like black walls. Every so often I thought I saw a flicker of light in the woods, but I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. We pulled into his driveway, and he didn't even unload the dogs like normal. He just parked the truck and sat there with the engine running, staring at the steering wheel. I sat there too, listening to the engine tick over and the hounds shifting around in their box, still silent, still scared. After a while, he turned off the truck and said, "Let's get you inside." That was all. He didn't say anything else about what we saw. He just unlocked the front door, let me inside, and went back out to take care of the dogs. I sat in the kitchen staring at the wood paneling on the walls, hearing the clock tick so loud it felt like a hammer in my skull. My hands were still shaking when I took my boots off. My socks were damp with sweat and mud, and I could smell the woods clinging to my clothes. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay awake in the guest bed under the deer antlers nailed to the wall, listening to the frogs out by the pond, waiting to hear that humming sound again or see the fog seeping under the door. The next morning, my uncle made eggs and bacon like he always did. The smell filled the house, making my stomach twist with hunger and leftover fear. We didn't talk about what happened. I think he didn't want to scare me more than I already was. Or maybe he was scared himself and didn't want to say it out loud. The dogs stayed quiet all day, laying on their sides in their pen, eyes wide and unblinking. That was the last time I ever went coon hunting with him. I never told my parents exactly what happened. I just told them I didn't want to go out again. Years later, even now as a grown man, I still think about that night. I think about the way the light glowed so bright and yet didn't feel warm, the way the fog came in and took away the whole world for a few seconds, the way that noise shook my bones like they were tuning forks. I've read stories about people seeing things in the woods, about lights and noises and lost time. I don't know what happened to us out there. I just know it wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a man with a flashlight, and it wasn't a dream. The dogs knew it too. That's what scares me the most when I remember it. Because dogs don't lie. They don't imagine things. They just know. And that night, whatever was out there made them cry like their souls had been ripped out. Sometimes I wake up in the dark with that humming sound in my chest again, and I lay there listening for the fog to roll back in. It never does, but the memory is enough to freeze me in place, just like it did back then, under the black trees of southern Ohio. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, my family decided to go on a summer vacation up to a small island off the coast of Maine. At that age, everything felt big and new to me, but this place felt different from the moment we stepped off the little ferry that carried us there. The island felt like it had been sitting there for hundreds of years, unchanged, ignored by the world around it. The air smelled like seaweed and old wood, and the wind carried this constant salty chill, even though it was July. We rented this house right on the water. I remember stepping onto the porch and feeling the planks bend under my feet, like they were tired from holding up so many people for so long. The house smelled like old paper, old clothes, and something deeper like stale earth. The furniture inside was ancient. Wooden chairs with carved backs and sagging seats, heavy tables with little chips on every edge, and beds with thin mattresses that dipped in the middle. Every lamp had those yellowing shades, and the rugs were faded with worn-down paths leading across them, like footprints from people who weren't there anymore. There was no television in the house, no computers, no radio. Just shelves and shelves of books, many of them with cracked spines and rough old paper that smelled like dust and mold. Some books had names written on the inside covers in dark fountain pen, dated from the 1930s or 1940s. There were photos on the walls of people I didn't know, all black and white, some curling at the corners. Pictures of kids in groups, old men with hats and canes, women in stiff dresses standing beside flower beds. Nobody smiled in any of the photos. They all looked serious, staring straight ahead, holding still like they didn't want to be forgotten. Outside the house, there was a big backyard that led down to a little rocky shore. During the day, it was quiet except for the seagulls. But at night, when we switched off all the lights to go to bed, the yard came alive with squeaking and scratching. Rats ran everywhere. You could hear them scurrying across the gravel, rustling through weeds and bushes, squeaking at each other. Sometimes I peeked out the back window with a flashlight and saw dozens of glowing eyes darting away into the shadows. It made me feel sick, knowing they were out there while I was trying to sleep. The island itself had only about 6 or 7 houses. Every person living there seemed really old, like in their 60s or 70s at least, except for one man everyone called Bubba. He was a big man with a thick beard and deep lines around his eyes, probably in his 40s, who spent most of his time fishing alone in a little boat. He barely spoke to anyone. The old ladies, though, they always seemed to know what we were doing. Every time my mom made dinner, they would just appear at our door with something: blueberry pie, fresh caught bluefish, baked bread, jars of jam. I remember standing there holding the screen door open, while 3 or 4 of them came up our steps, holding plates covered in tin foil or towels. They would nod and smile without really smiling, their eyes never leaving our faces. I didn't understand how they always knew when dinner was ready, but it felt like they were watching us. The first few days passed slowly. We went for walks along the rocky beach, picking up shells and bits of driftwood. My dad took us out fishing with Bubba once. Bubba didn't talk the whole time, just showed us how to bait the hooks and cast the lines. His boat smelled like dead fish and wet rope. I sat there with my little life vest rubbing my chin raw, feeling cold because of the wind off the water. Every time I looked back at the island, it looked darker, like the trees and the old houses were pressing together to keep secrets from us. At night, my parents would read while I lay on the thin mattress in my room, listening to the house creak and settle around me. The wind outside made a soft howling sound through the gaps in the window frames, and sometimes the roof popped like someone stepping across it. I kept telling myself it was just the wood adjusting to the cold night air, but it never really made me feel better. I could hear the rats in the backyard all night, scratching and digging around under the porch. One night, my parents told me in the morning they had woken up to hear singing. They didn't think much of it at first. They thought it was someone playing a record, or maybe a radio far away. The next morning, my dad asked Bubba if he heard it, but Bubba just shook his head. My mom asked one of the old ladies, and she said she didn't hear anything either. Another night went by, and again my parents heard the singing. They said it would start and stop, quiet and distant, then clear and close, almost like whoever was singing was walking around the house. The third night I heard it too. I woke up in the middle of the night because the house was so quiet it felt like it was holding its breath, and then I heard this faint singing coming from outside. It didn't sound like one person. It sounded like a group of kids, all singing together in this gentle, smooth way, like a lullaby almost, but I couldn't understand the words. My chest felt tight, and I pulled the blanket up to my chin and just lay there, staring at the ceiling in the dark. The singing would stop for a while, then start again. When it stopped, the silence felt even heavier than before. The next morning, my dad looked tired. He spent most of the day going through the books and papers in the old library room. I remember walking in there and seeing piles of books on the floor around him, papers scattered everywhere, the smell of old leather and mold strong in the air. There was a window that looked out onto the backyard, and I saw a couple of rats darting under the porch while he flipped through pages, not even noticing them. That afternoon, he found an old scrapbook buried under a stack of magazines from the 1950s. The scrapbook was thick, with a cracked black cover and yellowing pages inside. I watched him as he flipped through the pages, seeing black and white photos of children lined up in rows, all wearing dark little suits or dresses. Their faces were pale, their eyes serious, their hair cut short. Some pages had newspaper clippings glued into them about school plays and church gatherings from the early 1920s. Near the back of the scrapbook was a page that had a handwritten title across the top in neat cursive writing: The Boys' Choir, Winter 1924. Underneath was a photo of about 15 boys standing in 2 rows inside a building that looked exactly like the living room of our house. The fireplace was the same, the windows with their old wooden frames were the same, and I could even see the same lamp standing in the corner. The boys were dressed in dark suits with stiff collars. They all had the same serious faces as the other pictures, staring ahead like they were trying not to move. I stared at their faces for a long time, looking at their expressions, their hair parted neatly to the side, their little hands folded in front of them. They looked like normal kids, but something about them felt wrong to me. Maybe it was how still they looked, like they weren't really there. I remember my dad sitting back on the old chair, holding the scrapbook on his lap, and staring at that page for a long time. My mom stood behind him with her hand on his shoulder, reading over his shoulder. The house was so quiet that day. Even the seagulls sounded far away. I just stood there, looking out the window into the yard, thinking about the singing we heard at night, thinking about how our house used to be a schoolhouse almost 100 years ago, thinking about the boys in the picture, and wondering what their singing sounded like back then. That night was our last on the island. My parents didn't say much during dinner. The old ladies came by again with blueberry pie and bluefish, just like every other night, but they seemed quieter too, their eyes flicking to our faces then away again. After dinner, my dad started packing our things. He said we would leave early the next morning, instead of waiting for the afternoon ferry. My mom didn't argue. She just helped fold clothes and wrap food in foil to take with us. I lay in bed that night with my eyes open, staring into the dark. The rats were out again, scratching in the grass and under the porch. The wind blew against the windows, making a low moaning sound through the cracks. I waited, listening to the silence press against my ears. Then I heard it again, the singing. This time it felt closer, like it was coming from right outside my window. The voices were small and soft, like children trying not to wake anyone, and they rose and fell together in this sad, smooth way. My chest hurt listening to it, like the sound was too heavy for my little lungs to hold. I didn't move. I just lay there, feeling the mattress sag under me, listening to the singing drift in and out of the wind. It went on for a long time, and when it finally stopped, I didn't feel relieved. I felt emptier than before. The next morning, we packed everything into the car before sunrise. The ferry came while the sky was still gray and cold. I remember standing on the deck, holding my mom's hand, looking back at the island as we pulled away. The houses looked small and dark among the trees, and the water slapped against the ferry's sides as we moved. I could see our house from the boat, with its old gray roof and sagging porch. It looked like it was staring back at me, watching us leave. We never went back to that island again. Sometimes I think about it when I hear kids singing, or when I see black and white photos of children lined up for school pictures. I think about the old scrapbook in the boys' choir, their small, serious faces frozen in time, and I wonder if they ever left that old schoolhouse, or if they're still there, singing to themselves in the dark, long after everyone else is gone. I'm using an alt for this because I really don't want anyone who knows me in real life to know this is my story. Even though it happened a long time ago, I still feel embarrassed by how stupid we were. I grew up in a small town in Kansas. One of those towns where you know everyone by name. The kind of place with one grocery store, 2 gas stations, and a bunch of beat-up trucks parked outside tiny houses. A place you dream about leaving when you're a kid, and if you're lucky, you actually do. I've since gotten the hell out of there, and I never plan on going back. Growing up, there were a lot of meth heads around. You could tell by the sunken faces, missing teeth, and the way they'd wander down the road at night like zombies, twitching and scratching at themselves. They lived mostly on the outskirts of town in trailers, or in tiny houses with broken windows and rusted cars in the yards. I always knew about them. Everyone did. They were just part of the background noise of life there. One time, when I was 16, my friend Justin told me he'd seen some creepy abandoned house out on an off-road several miles outside of town. We were at the Sonic, sitting in his old Chevy S, 10 drinking slushes, and he told me he wanted to check it out. Back then, we were just dumb kids looking for any thrill we could find. It was a boring place to grow up. Nothing happened there. So when he said there was some old creepy house we could explore, I said sure, why not? It was late afternoon when we went. The sun was still up but starting to go down, making everything look orange and gold. We drove down the highway past the last gas station, then turned onto a gravel road. The road shook his truck so much that it sounded like the whole thing was about to fall apart. Dust rose behind us, hanging in the air like a long ghost trail. We drove past empty fields with tall dead grass, and past a few trees that had lost most of their leaves. Finally, he turned onto a dirt trail that cut off from the gravel road. There weren't any signs or anything, just a narrow path that looked like maybe it used to be used for farming equipment. We drove about half a mile down that dirt trail until we saw it. The house. It was sitting in the middle of some overgrown weeds and brush. The siding was peeling off, showing the bare wood underneath. All the windows were busted out, the glass either completely gone or hanging in sharp shards. There was an old satellite dish attached to one side of the house, bent almost to the ground. The front porch had collapsed in on itself. The whole place looked like it had been forgotten for decades. We parked the truck under some trees, so no one could see it from the road, even though we didn't see a single car the whole time we were out there. We walked up to the house. The grass was so high it brushed against my knees. There were empty beer cans and crushed plastic bottles scattered around the yard. Near the porch there was an old tire half buried in the dirt. When we stepped onto what was left of the porch, it creaked loudly, the boards sagging under our weight. The front door was shut tight. Justin tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The wood frame was swollen and rotted. So we shoved ourselves against it, leaning all our weight into it until it finally burst open with a cracking sound that echoed inside. The smell hit me immediately. It was this sharp, chemical smell that made the inside of my nose sting. I didn't really think about what it was back then. I just remember feeling like I shouldn't be breathing it in. But I did anyway because I was too stupid to think about danger at that point. The air felt heavy and stale, like it hadn't been moved in years. The first room was just an empty living room with old, ripped-up carpet covered in dirt and leaves that had blown in. There were stains on the floor, some dark brown, some black. Pieces of the ceiling had fallen down, leaving piles of plaster on the ground. There were old newspapers scattered around, all yellow and curled at the edges. A broken recliner sat in the corner, its stuffing spilling out like cotton. We stepped carefully, trying not to trip over broken boards and glass. In the doorway to what looked like a kitchen, I saw this metal can. It was full of rocks, or maybe small pieces of metal. I couldn't really tell because it was dark inside, and we only had the light from the setting sun coming through the busted windows. There was a string attached to the can, stretched across the doorway about a foot above the ground. We both just stepped over it without thinking twice. I didn't even think about what it was for until much later. The kitchen smelled even worse. There were empty bottles and cans everywhere, some with labels I didn't recognize. There were stained towels on the counter and little glass pipes scattered around. The floor was sticky in some spots. I remember I stepped into something that felt like syrup, and when I lifted my shoe it made this gross peeling sound. The cabinets were all open, some hanging off their hinges. There were brown stains dripping down the cabinet doors. I could feel my heart beating fast in my chest, but I told myself it was just adrenaline from being somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. We decided to go upstairs. Looking back, I have no idea why we thought that was a good idea. The stairs were covered in broken glass. Every step we took made this loud crunching sound. It echoed through the whole house. My legs were shaking as I walked up. There were pieces of broken boards sticking out from the steps. The handrail was missing in some parts and loose in others. I gripped it anyway, feeling splinters dig into my palm. At the top of the stairs was a narrow hallway. The walls were covered in peeling floral wallpaper, revealing the cracked plaster underneath. There were 3 doors. The first room was empty except for a bare mattress lying on the floor with no sheets. It had big brown stains on it. There was an empty soda can sitting on the mattress like someone had used it as a table. The window was busted out and glass littered the floor. The second room had an old dresser with half the drawers missing. One of the drawers was on the ground with clothes spilling out, all torn and dirty. There was graffiti spray painted on the wall in big black letters, but I couldn't tell what it said because the letters were distorted. We went to the third room. I don't know why we did. Maybe we were just too far gone in our curiosity to stop ourselves. I walked in first. That's when I saw him. There was a man standing in the corner near the window. His back was turned to us at first, but when he heard the glass crunch under my shoe, he spun around fast. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. His face was sunken, his cheekbones sticking out so far it looked like his skin was stretched tight over his skull. He wasn't wearing a shirt, just dirty jeans that hung loose on his skinny hips. His ribs showed with every breath he took. He was holding a handgun. It was shaking in his hand. He lifted it up, and his mouth started moving. I couldn't even process what he was saying because my body was frozen with fear. My chest felt tight, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears so loud that everything sounded muffled. But I could tell he was screaming. His whole face was twisted in anger and panic. The gun kept moving in his hand, like he couldn't control it. I thought for sure I was about to die right there. That this was it. My knees felt weak, and I thought they were going to give out under me. Justin grabbed my arm so hard it hurt and pulled me backwards out of the room. We ran down the hallway, down the stairs, crunching over the glass as fast as we could, almost tripping. I remember hitting my shoulder on the door frame as we rushed out, but I didn't feel any pain. My body was too full of adrenaline to feel anything. We ran across the porch, almost falling through one of the broken boards, then across the yard through the tall grass that scratched at my legs. We didn't stop running until we reached the truck. Justin fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so bad it took him 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life. He threw it into reverse, the tires spinning in the dirt before we shot backwards onto the dirt trail. Neither of us said a word. My heart was beating so fast I thought I was going to throw up. The whole drive back to town was silent, except for the rattling of his old truck. My hands were clenched so tight my knuckles were white. When we got back to town, we went to Sonic again and just sat there, sipping melted slushes, staring straight ahead. It wasn't until later that night, when I was lying in bed, that I realized what the metal can and string were. It was a tripwire, probably attached to something that would have alerted whoever was upstairs if we tripped it. Maybe it would have made a loud noise, or maybe it would have triggered something else. I don't know, but thinking about how close we came to tripping it made my chest tighten all over again. I found out later that the house was a meth lab. Someone older told me about it a year or so after it happened. They said it was known by the sheriffs as a place junkies would cook meth. They probably used the chemicals in the kitchen to make it. I remembered that sharp smell and how it stung my nose. I thought about how stupid we were to walk in there without even thinking. How lucky we were not to get shot or poisoned by whatever fumes were filling that place. A couple years ago, before I finally left that town for good, I drove past the old dirt trail. I could barely see it anymore. Weeds and bushes had grown up so high it was almost hidden, but I knew exactly where it was. I parked my car on the side of the road and walked down the trail a little ways. The house was gone, torn down. All that was left was a clearing with tall grass and some pieces of broken concrete half buried in the dirt. The air smelled clean there, just like dirt and weeds in summer heat. I stood there for a few minutes, listening to the cicadas buzzing in the trees and thinking about how close I came to dying when I was 16. I turned around and walked back to my car, feeling this deep relief that it was gone. That house had always felt like a scar on the land, and seeing it gone made me feel like maybe some things can heal eventually. I drove away, the dust rising behind my tires, and I never looked back. I never really believed in haunted houses before I moved into that place. It was a small brick house in an old neighborhood tucked away behind cracked sidewalks and trees that looked like they'd been there for centuries. When we first pulled into the driveway, I remember thinking it looked peaceful. The yard was quiet, the neighbors kept to themselves, and there was nothing unusual about it. It just looked like another old house that needed a bit of work. When we got the keys, my husband at the time was excited. He saw the potential in every room and every old fixture. I just felt uneasy but brushed it off. I told myself it was just nerves about moving. We were going to tear out the kitchen floor and redo the bedroom floors before moving our furniture in. So for the first week or so, the house was empty. Every day he'd leave for work early in the morning, and I'd be there alone with nothing to do but walk around the empty rooms, sometimes sweeping up sawdust or just standing in silence wondering what I should do next. There was no TV, no chairs, just bare floors and dusty windows. At night, I slept on a thin mattress we had put in the master bedroom. There was something about that room I couldn't stand. The first night alone there, it felt like the walls were closing in on me. I'd lay on my back and stare at the ceiling, feeling like there was something standing right over me. I couldn't explain it. I tried to sleep, but the fear was so strong it felt like my chest was caving in. I started to sweat, and every sound the house made echoed in my head. I heard the wind outside moving through the trees, and it sounded like whispers right by my window. The floor creaked even when nothing was moving. I felt like my skin was crawling, like someone was staring at me from the corner of the room. When he left for work around 4 in the morning, I bolted out of the bed, grabbed my dog's leash, and ran to my car. My dog didn't even bark or whine. She just followed me with her tail tucked down. I sat in the front seat with her until the sky turned light blue and the sun finally rose. I didn't go back inside until I saw neighbors walking around, taking out their trash and getting in their cars for work. That was just the first experience, but it already felt like something was terribly wrong with that house. After the floors were finished and the furniture moved in, I started sleeping in the bedroom across the house, away from that master bedroom. It wasn't as big or nice, but I felt safer there. We had some friends move in with us, a friend of mine and her husband. The boys were both in the Marines, so a week later they left for training for 2 weeks, and it was just us girls in the house. I thought maybe it would feel better to have another person around, but it didn't. The first night, she came running into my bedroom in the middle of the night. She was shaking, her hair all messy like she'd just woken up from a nightmare. She climbed into bed beside me without saying anything. I was half asleep, confused, but I made space for her. I remember thinking she was sleepwalking or something, because she didn't explain right away. Then, not even 5 minutes later, the entire bed started to shake. It wasn't a soft vibration like a truck driving by. It shook so hard that I felt my teeth rattle in my jaw. My stomach felt sick. I froze in place, staring at the dark ceiling, and I felt her grab onto my arm so tightly her fingernails dug into my skin. The shaking stopped after maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like forever. I couldn't move. I just laid there sweating, listening to the walls creak, feeling the hot air around me. I could hear her breathing heavy beside me. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. We just laid there until the sun rose and the room turned gray with morning light. The next night was the same. She tried to sleep in her room, but came running back when her bed started shaking again. Her room was the master bedroom, the same room I had felt that mind-numbing fear in. She told me later she heard scratching noises in her closet. She said it started at the ceiling and scratched all the way down to the floor. She was terrified to open the closet door. Another time, she went to sleep with her closet door closed and her fan turned off. She woke up an hour later and her closet door was wide open and the fan was running on high, blowing cold air right at her face. She refused to sleep in that room alone again after that. One night, I was sitting in my room and she was in my bathroom doing her makeup. Suddenly, the lights went out in both rooms. At first, we thought the power went out. I got up, heart racing, feeling my way down the hall to the kitchen. Every other light in the house was working. I flipped switch after switch, even checked the breaker box. Everything was fine. The power was on, but both of our rooms were in total darkness. I called my dad. He's an electrician. He asked if the breaker tripped, if the bulbs burned out. Everything was working. I stood there arguing with him on the phone, refusing to go back into my room. After 20 minutes of trying to figure it out, we finally walked back to my room, and as soon as we stepped inside, the lights turned on by themselves. Bright and steady, like nothing had ever happened. I felt sick to my stomach. My hands were trembling when I hung up the phone. Around Halloween, we decided to set up a video camera. I wanted proof of what was happening. We put the camera on the kitchen table, facing down the hallway towards my bedroom. We left it running while we went outside to sit on the porch. When we watched the video later that night, I felt the blood drain from my face. The walls had shadows moving across them. They were quick, like someone was walking back and forth, but the house was empty. The camera would go fuzzy and then clear, over and over, like someone was waving their hand right in front of the lens. We charged the camera fully, then set it up again. It was supposed to run for at least 4 hours. In the video, you could see us walk down the hall into our bedroom. As soon as we turned off the bedroom light, the video stopped. The battery died after only 6 minutes, and the camera was completely dead when we checked it. Months later, the boys came home. One night we had a bonfire out back with a bunch of their friends. Everyone was sitting around drinking beer, talking about work, smoking cigarettes under the stars. Clark, one of my husband's friends, went into the house to grab more beer. When he came back out, he was pale as a ghost. His eyes were wide, and his hands were shaking so bad, he almost dropped the beer. At first, everyone laughed at him, but he wasn't joking. He said he saw 3 men in Civil War uniforms standing around the fire pit, just staring at the flames. He was sober, and I could see how scared he was. His face was drained of color, and he couldn't stop looking over his shoulder the rest of the night. After that, things calmed down a bit. The bed didn't shake anymore. The lights didn't cut off as often. Sometimes small things would still happen, like I'd hear footsteps on the porch or things would go missing and turn up days later in strange places. The couch would shake if someone new slept on it, like whatever was there was testing them. It almost felt like it got used to us and stopped trying to scare us as badly. But whenever someone new came over to spend the night, something would happen to them. Their bags would go missing. The TV would turn on by itself in the middle of the night. The water would start running in the kitchen sink. It became a joke in the house. Everyone would say, "If the ghost likes you, it'll mess with you tonight." We never actually saw anything. There were no floating figures, no glowing lights, no ghostly faces in mirrors. Just feelings, just sounds, just shaking beds and flickering lights and shadows that didn't belong to anyone. But that was worse in a way. It felt real because it wasn't obvious. It wasn't like a movie where something jumps out at you. It was quiet, creeping up on you when you were alone in the dark. It made me feel like I was losing my mind. When we finally moved out, I didn't look back. I packed my things quickly and left the house empty. I don't know if the people who live there now ever felt what we felt. Maybe they never noticed anything. Or maybe they woke up one night with their bed shaking, their room dark and silent except for the sound of fingernails scratching inside their closet. I hope they never feel that kind of fear. The kind that makes you sweat in the middle of winter. The kind that makes you sleep in your car with your dog at 4 in the morning because you're too scared to stay inside your own house. The kind that makes you wonder if there really is something wrong with you, or if something is watching you every night when you're alone, just waiting for you to notice it. All I know is, I'll never forget that feeling. I'll never forget the way my chest would tighten up every time I walked down that hallway at night, or the way I would hold my breath when I passed by that master bedroom. It never felt like a home to me. It felt like a place that belonged to something else, and we were just guests there, staying until it decided it was done with us. It was October 11th, 2001. I remember the date so clearly, not just because it was 1 month after September 11th and the world felt heavy with sadness already, but because that was the day my grandfather died. I was 14 years old. I woke up early that morning, thinking it was going to be just another normal Thursday at school. The sun was barely coming up, and I was lying there in bed listening to the quiet of the house. Usually, my mom would already be in the kitchen making coffee, and I'd hear the news playing softly on the small counter radio. But that morning it was silent. Too silent. I got up and walked out to the hallway. The first thing I noticed was my mom sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. I remember her coffee cup was there, but the coffee was cold and untouched. My dad was standing near the window, just staring out into the front yard, like he wasn't really seeing anything. I didn't even have to ask what was wrong. I just knew it deep down. My grandpa had been sick for a while, though he never really showed it to us kids. He was the type of man who could be in pain but still smile at you and make you laugh about something random. like the squirrel stealing the bird feed, or how he caught a mouse in the barn using an old boot and a handful of peanuts. He never showed weakness. But in the past few months, he had started drinking a little more. At first it was just a beer with dinner, then a glass of whiskey before bed. Then it turned into a bottle almost every night. My parents tried to talk to him, but he was stubborn. He always said it helped him sleep and kept his bones warm. I guess it kept his mind warm too. Maybe too warm. That morning my mom told me he passed away in his sleep. She said they found him still in bed, like he had just drifted off and never woke up. She told me it was peaceful. I asked if he had anything with him, and she said there was an empty bottle of whiskey on his nightstand. I pictured him lying there, maybe feeling lonely, maybe thinking about his wife who died when I was a baby, and I felt this deep guilt in my chest. Like I should have visited him more or called him the night before. The truth was, I loved him more than anyone in the world. I could tell I was his favorite grandkid too. He always called me champ. He always ruffled my hair, even when I started getting taller. He never forgot my birthday, never once. Even when he forgot his own appointments or lost track of what day it was, he always remembered mine. I didn't know how to process the fact that he was just gone. Just like that. The funeral was 3 days later. It was a cold, cloudy Sunday. I remember waking up that morning feeling like I was full of wet sand, heavy and empty at the same time. My mom made me wear this itchy black sweater and a pair of dress pants that felt too tight around my waist. On the way there, no one really talked. My dad just drove in silence, his eyes focused on the road. My mom was sitting in the passenger seat, holding a tissue to her nose, trying to be strong for everyone else. My little sister was too young to really understand what was happening. She just kept looking out the window at the falling leaves and asking if we were going to see Grandpa soon. I didn't say anything. I just stared down at my hands in my lap, feeling the tears burning at the corners of my eyes, but refusing to let them fall. I didn't want to cry in front of my dad. I didn't want to look weak. We got to the cemetery, and there were already a lot of cars parked along the narrow gravel road leading in. The funeral home had set up a green tent over the burial spot, and folding chairs were lined up in rows facing the coffin. Everything felt surreal. I kept thinking about how just a few weeks before, my grandpa had been sitting in his recliner at home watching an old Western movie, eating peanuts from a cracked blue bowl that he'd had for as long as I could remember. Now he was lying in a box in the ground. It didn't feel real. I didn't want it to be real. I remember standing there at the burial ceremony. I stood a little farther back than most of our family. My mom told me to come closer, but I shook my head. I needed my space. I didn't want anyone to see me cry. I folded my arms tightly across my chest and buried my face into my jacket. The smell of the fabric was comforting in a way, like safety. I closed my eyes and the tears came out hot and fast. I couldn't stop them. My shoulders shook and I felt like I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, my heart aching in a way I didn't even know was possible before that day. Then I felt an arm wrap around my shoulders. At first I thought it was my mom. The warmth, the way she pressed her face into my cheek. I could hear her crying too, her soft sobs muffled by my jacket. It felt so real. I could feel the pressure of her arm, the way her head rested against mine for a moment. It made me cry even harder because I felt like I wasn't alone. Like someone was there for me even if I couldn't say anything out loud. It felt good to be held like that, just for a moment. Then she let go. I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. I sniffed and wiped my nose with the back of my hand. I opened my eyes, expecting to see her standing right next to me. But what I saw made my heart skip a beat. My mom was standing 20 feet in front of me, near the rest of the family. She was holding my sister's hand and looking down at the coffin. Everyone was standing there together, heads bowed, silent. I looked around, turning my head left and right. There was no one near me. I was completely alone. My skin prickled with this cold feeling, like every hair on my body was standing up. I didn't understand what just happened. I knew I felt an arm around me. I knew I heard someone crying with me. I knew I felt their head pressed against my cheek. I could still feel the warmth of it fading off my skin, but no one was there. For a second I thought maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was so deep in grief that my mind just made it up to comfort me. But it felt too real, too solid, too warm. I felt like I was losing my mind. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind or the way my jacket folded around me, but deep down I knew it wasn't. It was something else. I started thinking maybe it was my grandpa. Maybe it was his way of saying goodbye, of hugging me one last time before they lowered him into the ground forever. But then my logical side kicked in. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits. I believed in what I could see, what I could touch. I kept standing there, feeling this strange numbness in my chest, watching as they finished the ceremony. People started leaving, walking back to their cars, hugging each other, whispering quiet words of comfort. My mom turned around and waved for me to come. I felt my legs moving, but my head felt fuzzy, like I was in a dream. On the way home, I didn't say anything. I just stared out the window at the passing trees, my reflection looking pale and empty in the glass. That night, I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling in the dark. I kept thinking about that moment. The hug, the crying, the warmth. I kept replaying it over and over again in my head, trying to figure out if it really happened or if I made it up. Every time I thought about it, I felt this chill run through me, like a cold breeze blowing straight through my chest. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mom, not my dad, not my friends at school. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. In the days after the funeral, I kept expecting to feel it again. Sometimes I would be sitting at my desk doing homework, and I'd get this feeling like someone was standing right behind me, reading over my shoulder. Other times I would wake up in the middle of the night and swear I heard footsteps in the hallway or the sound of someone sitting down in the chair by my desk. But whenever I turned to look, there was nothing, just shadows and silence. It never felt scary exactly, but it didn't feel comfortable either. It felt wrong, like something was there that shouldn't be. Weeks turned into months. School went on. Life went on. But that moment never left me. Even now, as an adult, I still think about it. I think about how real it felt, how confusing it was. I never came up with an answer. Maybe I really did just imagine it. Grief does weird things to your mind. It makes you see and feel things that aren't there, just because you need them so badly to be there. Or maybe it was something else, something I can't explain. Maybe my grandpa really did hug me goodbye that day. Maybe I just mistook his presence for my mother's. I'll never know for sure. All I know is that when I think back to that day, to that cold October morning with the gray sky and the rustling dead leaves under my shoes, I don't just remember his funeral. I remember the warmth of that hug, the sound of someone crying with me into my jacket, the way it made me feel not so alone for just a few seconds. And maybe that's all that really matters. Whether it was real or not, it made me feel like I wasn't alone. It made me feel loved in the middle of the worst pain I had ever felt in my life. It gave me a little bit of comfort on a day when everything felt dark and empty. Even now, all these years later, whenever I feel alone, I think back to that moment. To the warmth, the crying, the hug that came out of nowhere. It still creeps me out sometimes when I think about how no one was there. But at the same time, it reminds me that love doesn't always leave when a person dies. Sometimes it stays with you in the strangest ways, showing up when you need it most, even if you can't explain it or prove it to anyone else. That's how I choose to remember that day. Not just as the day I buried my grandfather, but as the day I felt his love one last time, in a way only I will ever understand. I still think about that day every now and then, when I'm alone, late at night, and my mind starts wandering to places it shouldn't. It was the summer between my junior and senior year of high school, a summer that felt like it would stretch on forever. I spent most of my time down by the lake in this small rural town where I had a bunch of friends. We didn't have big malls, we didn't have theaters or bowling alleys. We just had the lake, a few dusty roads, and each other. The days were long and hot, the sun always bright, and there was this feeling in the air like everything moved a little slower out there. I remember sitting on the edge of the water in the afternoons, dipping my feet in to cool off, letting the waves wash over my ankles. Sometimes I'd be there alone, and other times I'd be with friends, just wasting time, talking about nothing, skipping rocks across the surface, and seeing who could get the most skips. One day, it was just another one of those slow afternoons. We were all there, maybe 6 or 7 of us, sprawled out on towels and drinking cheap sodas that we'd bought from the little gas station down the road. Someone brought up the old abandoned house that sat back off a gravel road a couple miles from the lake. Everyone in town knew about it, though no one really knew who owned it anymore. Some said the owner died, and his family just left it to rot. Others said no one ever really owned it. Either way, it was just there, old and half falling apart, hidden behind thick bushes and trees. We decided to go check it out, because there just wasn't much else to do. That's how it was back then. You'd get bored, and you'd go looking for something to give you a little jolt of excitement. We piled into 2 cars, dust trailing behind us on the gravel road. The windows rolled down to let the hot summer breeze in. The drive only took about 10 minutes, but I remember feeling my chest tighten a little as we pulled up. I'd driven past the place before, but never stopped. Seeing it up close was different. The house sat crooked on its foundation, as if it was slowly sinking into the ground. The paint was peeling and faded to this dull gray, with streaks of old white showing through here and there. The windows were covered with warped wooden boards nailed on at awkward angles, leaving some gaps where you could see inside if you wanted to. The front steps were broken and uneven, weeds pushing up through the cracks. Someone laughed and said it looked like the kind of place you'd see in horror movies, and even though I chuckled with everyone else, I felt this weird tightness in my stomach that didn't go away. We got out and stood in the dry grass, swatting away bugs and squinting up at the house. The door was slightly open, just enough for someone to slip through. I remember feeling like we shouldn't be there, like we were trespassing on something that didn't belong to us, even if it was abandoned. But I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the only one scared, so I just followed them inside. The air was cooler in there, smelling like old wood, dust, and dampness. The floor was covered in broken glass, dirt, and scattered papers. There were a few pieces of broken furniture pushed up against the walls, like someone tried to clear space once, and then just gave up. Sunlight streamed in through the cracks between the boards, cutting the darkness into sharp lines. I stepped carefully, trying not to trip over anything. There were broken picture frames on the floor, their glass shattered, and the photos inside faded beyond recognition. Old books lay scattered near what used to be a fireplace. I remember kicking a piece of paper aside and seeing a mouse scurry away into the shadows. My heart jumped into my throat, but I kept quiet. I didn't want anyone to tease me. One of my friends, he was a tall kid with shaggy hair, who always wore the same pair of ripped jeans, started telling us a story about the house. He said he'd been there before, about a year ago, with some other people I didn't know. He was talking in this casual way, like he was telling a joke, but as he went on, his voice lowered a little, and I noticed he wasn't smiling anymore. He told us that when he was there last time, one of the guys with them found a book lying on a shelf in what used to be a bedroom. He didn't say what kind of book it was, just that it looked old. The guy picked it up, flipped through it, and decided to take it home with him. My friend said he remembered thinking it was a dumb thing to do, taking something from a place like this, but he didn't say anything back then. They all left that day without any problems. But later that night, something weird happened to the guy who took the book. My friend said that guy woke up in the middle of the night because he felt someone sitting on his bed. When he opened his eyes, he saw his mother sitting there, staring at him. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there with her hands on her lap. Then finally, in this quiet, calm voice, she told him he needed to return the book to the house. After that, she got up and left the room. In the morning, he went down to breakfast and asked his mom if she remembered coming into his room that night. She looked confused and told him she never did. She'd been asleep the whole night. The guy returned the book that day. No one really talked about it after that. As my friend finished the story, the room felt colder. I stood there staring at the broken floorboards, feeling goosebumps rise up on my arms despite the heat outside. The air felt heavier, thicker, like it was pushing down on my chest. I didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but hearing that story made my heart beat faster in my chest. I kept thinking about how it must have felt to see your mother sitting on your bed in the middle of the night, telling you to return something she didn't even know you had. We wandered around the house for a bit after that, just poking through old drawers and stepping over piles of broken wood and torn curtains. I found a small room at the back that looked like it used to be a kitchen. There were rusted pots still sitting on the stove, and an old metal kettle half buried under dust and dried leaves. The windows in there were so covered with dirt and grime that barely any light came through. I could see old cans stacked on a shelf, their labels peeled off and metal rusted into orange streaks down their sides. There was an old refrigerator too, its door hanging open with darkness inside. I didn't go near it. At some point, we all regrouped near the front door. One of the girls said she wanted to leave because the smell was starting to make her feel sick. We stepped back out into the bright afternoon sun, blinking as our eyes adjusted. The air outside felt fresh and warm, but I couldn't shake that cold feeling in my chest. As we walked back to the cars, I turned around for a moment and looked at the house. It just sat there in the quiet, hidden by trees, like it was waiting for something. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I thought about that story over and over. I imagined waking up to see someone sitting on my bed, just staring at me in the darkness, their face half hidden in shadow. I thought about how it would feel to hear their voice telling me to return something, even though they had no way of knowing I had it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that house. I saw the broken windows and the peeling paint. I saw that dark, cold room with the refrigerator standing open. For the rest of that summer, whenever someone brought up the idea of going back there, I always found a reason not to. I'd say I was busy, or that I needed to help my dad with something at home. The truth was, I didn't want to step foot in that place again. I didn't want to feel that heaviness pressing down on me. I didn't want to feel those goosebumps on my arms, or that cold sinking feeling in my chest. Years later, I still think about that house. I never went back, and I don't think I ever will. Sometimes I wonder what happened to that book. Did the guy put it back exactly where he found it? Or did he just leave it somewhere on the floor for someone else to find? I guess I'll never know. But every now and then, when I'm lying awake in the middle of the night, I think about that story. I think about how his mother told him to return the book, even though she didn't know anything about it. And in those quiet moments, with the dark pressing in around me, I wonder if some things in this world don't want to be taken, even if they're just old books covered in dust in a house no one lives in anymore. Maybe some things stay behind, and maybe it's best to just leave them where they are. Because even now, thinking about that story, I can still feel the cold prickle of goosebumps crawling up my arms, just like I did that day, standing in that quiet, broken house, with the sunlight slicing through the darkness and the smell of old wood all around me. I don't really think about my childhood too much. Most of it is just a blur of toys scattered on carpets, cartoons humming on old televisions, my mom calling me in for dinner, my dad lifting me up and making me laugh. But when I do think back, there are little flashes of memory that come back, like small lights turning on in the dark. And sometimes those lights make me feel uneasy, like something is hidden in the shadows between them. Jessie is one of those lights, though it's not really a light at all. It's more like a dark spot that my memory keeps skipping over, as if it's trying to protect me from remembering properly. I don't actually remember Jesse as a person. I can't see his face in my mind or hear his voice. All I really remember is that when I was very small, I used to talk to him a lot. My mom would find me sitting under the dining table with my knees pulled up to my chest, staring at something in front of me that she couldn't see. I don't remember doing that, but she's told me about it. She told me how I used to go quiet for a long time and then suddenly burst out laughing at nothing at all. She said I would come up to her and say random sentences like Jesse says it's raining at his house, or Jesse's mom makes him cake with no eggs. When I was a kid, those things never bothered me. Kids have imaginary friends all the time. Some kids grow out of them quickly, some keep them for years. To me, it's just something that happened, like learning to ride a bike or falling asleep in the car and waking up at home. But a couple of years ago, when I was visiting relatives in Ireland, my mom told the story again. We were all sitting in my aunt's living room, the lamps giving off a soft yellow glow, the fire crackling in the old fireplace. My cousins were telling ghost stories about the farm they grew up on, about seeing shadows walk past the sheds, or hearing footsteps on the gravel outside their windows. My uncle talked about a woman who walked the fields in a black dress and vanished when headlights touched her. I didn't really believe in ghosts, so I was mostly half listening and watching the flames dance in the grate. Then my mom started talking about Jessie. I hadn't heard that name in years, maybe since I was a teenager. When she said it, something in my chest felt tight, like a rubber band snapping back into place. I didn't say anything, just sat there with my arms crossed, listening to her voice. She said I was about 2 or 3 when I started talking about him. She didn't understand why I called him Jesse. She and my dad didn't know anyone with that name. None of their friends, none of their colleagues, no one in our family. She thought it was strange because I didn't even watch any kids' shows with that name in it. But kids come up with weird names all the time, so she let it go. She said there was this one morning when my dad was leaving for work. He worked as an electrician at the mine back then. It was still dark outside, and she was up making him tea for the drive. I came toddling into the kitchen, rubbing my eyes, and apparently I asked him to bring back coal for Jesse's gran. My dad just looked at my mom and shook his head. I was too young to know what coal was or what it looked like, and I definitely didn't understand what a mine was. My mom said it sent chills down her spine a little, because she didn't know how I even knew about old ladies using coal in their fireplaces. I was still learning colors and counting to 10 at that age. The final part of her story is what makes my stomach feel tight when I think about it. She said one day we were on a day trip. We used to go to this place a lot when I was really young, before I started school. It was just a small town with a lake and some walking trails. There was a small graveyard near the old church. I don't remember this trip at all, but my mom said we were walking along the path when I suddenly just ran off. I was never the type of kid to run off without warning, so she and my dad chased after me, thinking I might fall or hurt myself. She said I ran straight into the graveyard. It was an old place with mossy headstones and sloping ground, small stone borders marking family plots. I didn't look around or hesitate. I ran straight to a small grave near the back, in the shadow of a stone cross, and just stopped. I stood there staring at it, completely still. My mom said she felt her heart beating, so hard in her chest it almost hurt. She walked over to me and saw the name carved into the stone. It said Jesse on it. It was a child's grave. I don't remember any of this. When she told the story, everyone in the room was quiet. My cousins were staring at the fire. My aunt was sipping her tea silently. My uncle was shaking his head. I didn't say anything either. I just nodded slowly, like it was any other story. But later that night, when I was lying in bed in the guest room, listening to the wind tapping against the old window panes, I thought about it for hours. The room was cold because the heat didn't reach the far end of the house, and I was wrapped up tight in thick blankets that smelled like lavender. I tried to remember Jesse's face, but there was nothing there. Just the feeling of sitting under tables, of staring at something, of laughing when no one else was around. The next morning when I woke up, there was frost on the grass outside. I made tea and watched the sun rise over the fields, the light turning everything gold for a few minutes before fading to gray again. I thought about Jesse a lot that day, not as a ghost or some supernatural thing, but just as a part of my childhood that I didn't understand. I started wondering if maybe I had seen that grave before on another visit, and my young brain just turned the name into a friend. Maybe I heard my parents talking about someone named Jesse and didn't remember it. Maybe it was just coincidence that I ran to that grave. Kids run towards anything that catches their eye, a butterfly, a flower, a shiny stone. Maybe I just saw the grave and it looked interesting because it was small like me. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something I will never really understand. All I know is that thinking about it makes me feel uneasy, like a soft pressure in my chest that I can't quite get rid of. I don't tell people about Jesse. I don't tell my friends or bring it up at parties when everyone's telling creepy stories. It feels too personal, like talking about a secret part of myself that I don't even know. I wonder sometimes what my parents really thought back then. Were they scared or just confused? Did they ever talk about it when I wasn't around, wondering if there was something wrong with me? Sometimes at night when I can't sleep, I try to remember if I ever talked to Jesse about things that were happening in my life. Did I tell him about the time I fell off my bike and scraped my knees? Did I tell him about the puppy I saw at the park that I wanted so badly? Did I tell him about how sometimes I was scared of the dark and couldn't fall asleep unless my door was left open a crack? It makes me feel sad that I don't remember those things. It feels like losing a part of myself that I didn't even know I had. But in the end, Jesse is just a name now. A name carved into a stone in a graveyard I don't remember visiting. A name that makes my mom's voice go quiet and serious when she tells the story. A name that makes me feel small again, sitting under the table with my knees pulled up to my chest, staring into the empty space in front of me and laughing at something no one else could see. And that's all there is to it. Jesse was a part of my life for a little while, whether he was just a game my mind created or something real I can't explain. Either way, he's gone now. Just like any other friend I had when I was a child. Just like any other memory that fades away when you grow up, leaving only small flashes behind that make you feel like you're standing in the dark, trying to remember where the light switch is. I had just finished a late shift at work, and I was so tired that night. I remember checking the clock on my dashboard. It was almost midnight. I hated driving around the city at night, especially alone, but there was nothing I could do about it. My apartment was on the other side of town, and I still had to drive through this big parking garage to get to the main road. It was always quiet in there at this time, barely any cars or people. The only sounds were my own tires on the smooth concrete floors, echoing under the low ceiling. As I was driving down from the third floor, just taking each turn slowly because of how tired my eyes felt, I noticed something strange ahead of me. It was at the far end of the ramp going down to the second floor. At first I thought it was a pile of clothes someone had thrown away, but as my headlights moved closer, I realized it was a man lying there. He was wearing a gray hoodie and black pants, and he was sprawled out at an awkward angle, his legs twisted in a way that didn't look comfortable at all. I slowed down almost to a stop, my heart starting to beat a little faster. My mind was telling me to be careful. You hear stories of setups in quiet parking garages late at night. I looked around quickly, checking my mirrors and through my windows, making sure no one else was hiding behind the pillars or cars. When I rolled down my window just a little, I could hear him making these low, pained noises. He sounded like he was struggling to breathe. I didn't want to get out of the car, but I felt guilty just sitting there. I called out softly, asking if he was okay. He moved his head a bit, and I saw his face in the yellow light. There was blood running down from the side of his forehead. His hair was soaked with it, and it looked fresh, still shiny and wet. He croaked out that he needed help, that he needed to get to the hospital. My heart was beating hard in my chest, and I felt that tight feeling of fear and panic, but I also felt bad for him. What if he really needed help? What if he would die if I didn't do anything? I told myself I would be quick. Just drive him to the hospital, and then go home. He tried to get up, but he was weak, so I parked properly and got out to help him. As I walked closer, I kept glancing around, my senses on high alert. He was holding a black duffel bag next to him. It looked heavy. I offered to put it in the trunk for him, so he didn't have to carry it. He didn't say anything back. He just held the bag close to him. When I tried to reach out to take it, he pulled it away a little, then just dropped it at his feet. I felt uneasy about that. Something in my chest was telling me this wasn't right. But he had that bleeding head, and I didn't want to leave him there. He slowly stood up, his movements shaky like he was dizzy. I opened the passenger door for him and stepped back, watching how he threw the black duffel bag onto the floor at his feet, instead of putting it on the seat or handing it to me. I closed the door and quickly walked back around to the driver's side, my nerves feeling like they were on fire. I sat down and tried to calm my breathing. I asked him which hospital he wanted to go to. He didn't answer. He just mumbled something under his breath and leaned his head against the window, facing away from me. I started driving towards the nearest hospital, about 10 minutes away. The road was empty, dark, and silent except for the low hum of my car engine. I glanced at him every few seconds, feeling the fear crawl deeper into my stomach. After about 5 minutes, I noticed something strange. The blood on his head didn't look right. My headlights reflected off his face through the windshield, and I could see small edges peeling up where the blood was. At first I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then my heart dropped into my stomach. It wasn't blood. It was peeling off in little flakes like old paint or dried glue. I realized it was fake. My hands started shaking so badly that I had to grip the steering wheel tighter to keep control of the car. My mind was spinning. Why would he fake a head wound at midnight in a parking garage? Why did he have a heavy black duffel bag with him? I felt the coldest chill run down my back, like icy fingers pressing against my spine. I needed to get out of this. I couldn't keep driving him anywhere. I had to think fast. I remembered my dad once told me a trick to get out of a car with someone dangerous. He said to pretend there was something wrong with your car, so they would get out first. I took a deep, shaky breath and forced my voice to sound calm. I told him that I thought my back tire was flat, that I felt the car leaning to one side, and I didn't want to damage the rim. He didn't say anything, just turned his head slowly to look at me, his eyes blank and cold. Then he nodded once and opened the door. The second his foot touched the ground, I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the road, and I felt the car jerk forward so hard that my seatbelt locked up against my chest. I didn't look back. I just kept driving, taking the first turn I saw, my heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear anything else. My hands were shaking so bad that I could barely keep the car straight, but I forced myself to keep going. I didn't stop until I reached the police station. I parked right in front of the entrance, left my car running, and ran inside. My legs felt weak, like they would collapse any second. I told them everything, my voice trembling and my words coming out too fast. They sent 2 officers out to my car. I sat in the waiting chairs with my hands pressed between my knees, trying not to cry. I could still feel his eyes on me, that blank, cold stare that felt like he could see straight through me. When the officers came back in, one of them was holding the black duffel bag. He looked serious, his lips pressed into a tight line. They told me inside the bag was a large butcher's knife, still wrapped in a paper sheath, and a roll of heavy black garbage bags. My stomach twisted so hard I felt like I would throw up. I realized if I hadn't lied about the tire, if I had kept driving him to the hospital, I probably wouldn't have made it out of that car alive. They searched the area for him that night, but he was gone. They checked every floor of the parking garage and the streets nearby. There was no sign of him anywhere. Over the next few days, they checked security cameras, but the footage wasn't clear enough to see his face properly. They never caught him. No one knows who he was or where he went after that. For weeks I couldn't sleep properly. I kept seeing his peeling fake blood, his empty stare, and thinking about what would have happened if I didn't trust my gut. Every time I drove alone at night after that, my eyes searched every shadow, every corner, every person walking by my car. Years later, I still think about that night. I still feel my chest tighten when I park in quiet garages, remembering how close I came to never seeing the sunrise again. It made me realize that helping people is a good thing, but sometimes you have to listen to that small voice inside you telling you that something is wrong. Because if you ignore it, you might not get another chance to drive away. I woke up that morning feeling like it would be just another normal day. I didn't have work that day, so I decided I would go out to the woods behind my neighborhood to walk and maybe clear my mind for a while. Those woods stretched out for miles. A lot of people used to walk there, but not many went deep inside because it was easy to get lost if you didn't know the trails. I packed my water bottle in my small black backpack, threw in a granola bar, and put on my old running shoes. I left my house at around 8 a.m., feeling good about being outside before the day got too hot. The air felt cool when I stepped onto the small dirt trail leading into the trees. I could hear birds calling out all around me, and the smell of dry pine needles mixed with the earthy dirt under my feet. As I walked further in, the sounds of cars from the road behind me faded until all I could hear was the crunching of my steps, the rustle of leaves, and the faraway calls of crows. I walked for about an hour, taking turns I had memorized from the times I had been here before. My mind wandered to everything going on in my life. The bills I had to pay, the projects I hadn't finished, and the feeling of being stuck. But walking always helped me think clearer. After about another 20 minutes, I reached a small clearing I liked to sit in. There was a large flat rock under a tree that gave some shade. I sat down on it, took off my bag, and drank some water. I stayed there for a while, looking up at the bits of sky showing through the leaves above me, thinking about how quiet it felt out here compared to my normal life. I could hear a woodpecker tapping somewhere nearby. I closed my eyes, listening to that tapping echo faintly across the woods. When I opened my eyes again, I noticed something strange in the dirt a little way in front of me. It looked like the trail of a dragging foot, leading off into a bush on the left side of the clearing. I felt my stomach twist a bit. It didn't look like an animal trail. It was a thin, straight line with deeper scuffs in the dirt, almost like someone had been dragged or someone was limping heavily. I felt uneasy, but tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a deer that had injured its leg and dragged it along. I forced myself to keep calm, picked up my bag, and kept walking on the trail heading deeper into the woods. I walked another mile or so. The trail narrowed and the trees grew closer together. It felt darker here, with only bits of sun hitting the ground in thin slashes of light. I noticed the forest smelled stronger here too, like wet moss and old fallen leaves rotting into the dirt. My steps felt louder on the ground, echoing a little in the silence. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. I didn't know why, but something felt off. It was the kind of feeling that made you want to turn around and leave, but I forced myself to keep going. After a while, I came to a spot where the trail split in 2 directions. I usually went right, which looped back toward the edge of the woods, but for some reason that day, I chose to go left. I thought it might be nice to explore somewhere I hadn't been before. As I walked, the trail grew even narrower, and after about 10 minutes, it almost disappeared under fallen branches and leaves. I kept going, stepping carefully over a fallen tree trunk, feeling the rough bark scrape against my leg as I climbed over. I could hear insects buzzing near my ear, and I waved them away, feeling sweat start to gather on the back of my neck. Then I saw something that made me stop dead. Lying off to the side of the path was a black backpack. It was half hidden under a small bush, and it looked old and dirty. I looked around, feeling my chest tighten. There was no one in sight. The woods were silent except for the distant call of a crow. I took a few steps closer and crouched down to look at the bag. It was covered in dirt and pine needles, like it had been here for a while. Part of the zipper was broken off. I felt a strong sense of dread build up in my chest. I didn't touch the bag. I just stared at it for a long time, feeling my heart thudding harder with each passing second. I stood up, looking around again. That uneasy feeling was turning into fear now. My mind raced with questions. Who left this here? Where were they? Why hadn't they come back for it? I felt like I shouldn't be standing there, like I was trespassing in a place I wasn't meant to be. I turned around and started walking back the way I came, but the trail seemed different now. I couldn't find the fallen tree trunk I had climbed over. The trail looked less clear, almost like it had disappeared under the thick layer of leaves and branches. Panic started to creep in. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself I must have just walked a little further than I thought. I kept walking, looking for anything I recognized. After about 15 minutes of walking in what I thought was the right direction, I realized I was completely lost. My heart started beating, so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stopped and took out my water bottle, taking a long drink to calm myself down. The water tasted warm now, and my mouth felt dry again almost immediately. I tried to remember all the advice I had ever heard about being lost in the woods. Stay calm, look for landmarks, listen for roads or water. I stood still and closed my eyes, trying to hear anything that would tell me which direction to go. But all I could hear was the sound of birds and the breeze rustling through the leaves. I started walking again, this time trying to keep in a straight line, hoping it would eventually lead me out. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and small rocks, and I almost twisted my ankle a few times. I could feel sweat dripping down my back, making my shirt stick to me. My breath felt shallow and fast, and I kept trying to slow it down so I didn't start hyperventilating. I walked for what felt like an hour. My legs were starting to feel weak, and my stomach hurt with hunger. I stopped to eat my granola bar, sitting on a small rock. As I chewed it slowly, I felt tears well up in my eyes. I blinked them back, looking up at the sky. The sun had moved across and was starting to drop lower. Shadows grew longer on the forest floor, making everything look darker and more unfriendly. I knew if I didn't find my way out soon, I would have to spend the night here, and the thought made my chest tighten with fear. After eating, I stood up and kept walking. I didn't know what else to do but keep moving. As I walked, I started hearing sounds that made my stomach twist. Crunching leaves, sticks breaking behind me. At first, I thought it was just animals, but it felt different. The sounds would stop when I stopped. They would start again when I started walking. I tried to tell myself it was just my fear making me paranoid, but deep down I knew something was following me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see. I just kept walking faster, my eyes scanning the ground so I didn't trip. The sounds kept following me. I felt like I couldn't breathe properly anymore. My chest hurt from how tight my lungs felt. My mouth was so dry I could barely swallow. At one point, I thought I saw movement between the trees to my right, a dark shape moving quickly behind the trunks. I forced myself to keep going, ignoring the shaking in my legs. I could feel the rough straps of my bag digging into my shoulders with each step. The forest around me seemed darker now, like the trees were leaning in closer, blocking out more of the fading light. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw something that made me almost collapse with relief. A thin metal fence ran along the edge of the woods ahead of me. I almost ran to it, grabbing onto the cold metal with shaking hands. I looked through it and saw the back of a row of houses. I had come out on the far side of the woods, near a different neighborhood. My knees felt like they were about to give out from the relief and fear mixing together in my chest. I climbed over the fence, scraping my leg badly as I swung my foot over the top. The pain didn't even register properly until I was standing on the grass on the other side, breathing hard. I turned back to look at the woods behind me. The trees stood silently, dark and unmoving, but I felt like they were still watching me. I could still hear faint crunching sounds somewhere deep inside them. I didn't wait to see what it was. I started walking towards the houses, limping slightly from the cut on my leg. As I walked through the backyards, heading toward the road that would take me back to my neighborhood, I felt my fear start to ease, replaced with exhaustion. When I finally reached my house, I unlocked the door with shaking hands and stepped inside. The cool, still air of my living room hit me, and I closed the door behind me, locking it quickly. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat down on the carpet, my back against the door, breathing in and out until my chest stopped hurting. That night, I lay in bed thinking about everything that had happened. I kept remembering that dragging mark on the ground, the black backpack lying abandoned, and the feeling of being followed. I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark shape moving through the trees beside me. The next morning, my leg ached badly from the cut, but I didn't care. I was just glad I was back home. I never went back to those woods again. Every time I drove past them, I felt my stomach twist into a knot, remembering how quiet it had been out there, how it felt like I was being hunted without ever seeing who or what was watching me. And every time I thought about that old abandoned backpack lying under the bush, I felt my chest tighten with a cold dread, wondering who had left it there and if they ever made it out. I woke up before sunrise that day, feeling a little more tired than usual. My body was heavy, but I forced myself up because I had planned to hike to the small lake near my town before the day got hot. It was early summer, and the mornings were still cool and quiet, which I liked. I packed a bottle of water, an old peanut butter sandwich from the fridge, and a small folding knife I always carried when going out alone. I didn't expect to use it, but it felt wrong to leave without it. I left my house just as the sun was starting to rise, lighting up the road in front of me in a pale yellow glow. I walked past the closed shops and quiet houses. A few stray dogs were sleeping by the roadside, ignoring me completely. It took me about 15 minutes to reach the edge of town where the paved road ended and the dirt trail started. I felt the morning air grow colder as I walked down the path. It was narrow, with bushes on both sides and some broken branches sticking out. I moved them aside with my arm as I walked. After about an hour of slow walking, I reached the small lake. It wasn't a tourist spot or anything, just a quiet place hidden by trees, with greenish water and muddy banks. I had been coming here since I was a teenager whenever I needed to think or just be away from people. I found a rock near the water and sat down. I pulled out my sandwich and ate it slowly, feeling the cold stone under me and watching tiny ripples move across the lake's surface as fish came up to bite insects. There was a fallen tree lying halfway into the water on the far side, covered with moss. The smell was strong, earthy, a mix of wet mud, rotting leaves, and still water. After I finished eating, I lay back on the rock, closing my eyes for a few minutes. Birds were calling loudly from the trees above. Their sounds mixed with the rustle of leaves in the light breeze. When I opened my eyes again, the sun was up fully now. The shadows had shifted, and I could feel a slight warmth on my arms. I stood up and brushed off the dirt, and small pebbles stuck to the back of my shirt. I decided I would walk further down the trail along the lake before heading back. There was a small clearing I had seen on satellite maps, and I wanted to check it out. I followed the narrow dirt path, feeling roots under my shoes every few steps. The forest felt quiet, too quiet in some parts. Even the birds were silent in patches. I kept going, pushing away spider webs with a thin stick I had picked up from the ground. After maybe half an hour of walking, I reached the clearing. It was just a wide open space with dead grass and a few fallen logs. The ground was uneven with dry cracks near the center. I walked around slowly, scanning the ground. I saw some animal tracks in the dirt, maybe wild dogs or foxes. Near the edge of the clearing was an old metal fence, bent and rusted, disappearing into the forest in both directions. It looked like it had once been a boundary for something, maybe an old farm or property line. I went up to it and held one of the thin metal bars. It was cold even in the sun. I was about to turn back when I noticed something strange on the other side of the fence. There was a pile of empty plastic bottles, wrappers, and cans. It wasn't a normal littering spot. The trash was in a neat pile, as if someone had collected it together and left it there deliberately. I stepped over the bent fence to look closer. Some of the cans were rusty, and the wrappers looked old, half buried in dirt. But some bottles were newer. A few had labels I recognized from recent products. That meant someone had been here not long ago. I felt a shiver run down my back as I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. I turned to leave but froze when I saw movement deeper in the trees. I stood completely still, trying to see clearly between the trunks. At first I thought it was a dog or maybe a deer, but then I saw it was a person. He was standing very still behind a tree, almost hidden, but I could see part of his shoulder and head. He wasn't looking directly at me. It was more like he was trying to hide, but hadn't moved fast enough. My heartbeat grew heavy and loud in my ears. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there for a few seconds, trying to look calm. I turned away slowly and stepped back over the fence. I didn't run, even though every part of me wanted to. I just walked back to the trail, forcing myself to keep my pace normal until I was out of the clearing. When I got back onto the trail, I sped up. My breathing was tight, and I kept looking over my shoulder. The trees felt darker now, even though the sun was high. Every sound felt sharper. The crunch of my own feet on the dirt path, the creak of tree branches moving above me, the faint drumming of a woodpecker in the distance. I could feel sweat dripping down my back. I didn't know why the man was there. I didn't know if he had followed me or stayed hidden, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched the entire way back. I reached the lake again and felt a small relief seeing the water shining peacefully in the sun. I walked past it quickly and back onto the trail that would take me home. My mouth was dry and my stomach hurt from tension. I just wanted to reach town. As I walked, I kept replaying what I had seen. The neat pile of trash, the way he stood hidden but half visible, the old fence, and the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be there. My ears felt hot, and I kept scanning left and right, looking for movement in the trees. There was nothing, only silent trunks standing tall, brown and gray and unmoving. After what felt like an hour, I reached the end of the trail where it met the paved road. I stepped onto the road, and only then allowed myself to stop and breathe. My legs were shaking a little. I wiped sweat from my forehead with my shirt sleeve. Cars passed by in the distance, their sounds bringing me back to normal life. I turned back once to look at the entrance to the trail. It looked so harmless from here, just a narrow path disappearing into green trees. I walked back home quickly. When I reached, I took off my shoes at the door and sat down on the small stool in the entryway. My feet hurt and my legs felt weak. I drank almost a liter of water in one go and then lay down on the floor of my room, staring at the ceiling. My breathing slowed after a while. I felt tired, drained, like I had been running all day. Later that evening, as the sun set, I kept thinking about the man in the woods. Who he was, why he was standing there watching, why there was that neat pile of trash. I couldn't stop imagining him sitting out there alone, maybe living in the forest or hiding from something. The thought made my chest tighten with unease. I closed my curtains before it got fully dark. I didn't want to see the trees behind my house, didn't want to imagine a silhouette standing there in the dim light. That night, I lay in bed trying to sleep. My window was open a little to let the air in, but every small sound outside made me flinch. A car passing, dogs barking far away, a creak from the walls of the house cooling down after the day's heat. I rolled over and pulled my blanket up to my chin, staring at the wall. I thought about going back there to see if he was still there, but just thinking about stepping onto that trail again made my stomach clench with fear. I closed my eyes tight and forced myself to think about something else. In the morning, I woke up tired again. I got up, made tea, and sat by the window with it. The early light made everything look peaceful, as if nothing had happened yesterday. But deep down, I knew I wasn't going back there again, at least not alone. I didn't tell anyone about it. There was nothing to tell that wouldn't make me sound paranoid. I didn't even know what I saw. Just a man standing in the trees, half hidden, half visible. But that was enough. Enough to make me realize that the forest isn't always empty, and not everything hiding between the trees is an animal. The days went by, and I kept thinking about it. Sometimes, I would wake up at night and listen to the silence of my room, wondering if he was still out there, in some other part of the woods, standing behind some tree, watching whoever happened to walk by. The thought scared me more than anything else. Not ghosts or spirits or monsters. Just a real man, standing silent in the shadows, waiting for reasons I could never understand. Eventually, the memory faded, but it never truly left. Even now, whenever I go for walks along quiet trails, I keep looking at the trees, searching for any movement, any hint of someone standing there, hidden but watching. And every time I see nothing, I feel both relieved and worried. Because not seeing him doesn't mean he's not there. It only means he's hiding better than before. And I think about how easy it is for someone to disappear into the trees and wait. How easy it is to stand there, silent, watching, until the person they're waiting for walks by, never knowing they're being watched. That's what scares me the most. And that's why I never go into the woods alone anymore. I don't really know how to start this, but I guess I'll just tell it exactly how it happened. I was on my way back home from work one evening. I work in the warehouse section of a hardware store, so my hours can change a lot. That day I had an early morning shift that turned into a full day because someone called out sick. By the time I left, it was already getting dark outside. I was tired, hungry, and my legs felt heavy from standing all day lifting boxes and stocking shelves. My car isn't the best. It's an old 2002 Honda Civic with a bunch of scratches and dents. It still runs fine though, and that's all that really matters to me. I don't care what it looks like as long as it takes me where I need to go. That day it had about a quarter tank left, so I thought I should probably fill up before going home because I had to open again early the next morning. There's a gas station that's a little out of the way from my usual route, but it's cheaper by almost 10 rupees per liter compared to the one near my apartment. I turned off the main road onto a side street that runs behind an old abandoned textile mill. This area used to be busy a long time ago when the factory was still working. Now it's mostly empty buildings and overgrown lots, and people just use it as a shortcut if they're trying to avoid traffic. It was almost fully dark by the time I reached the road behind the mill. The place always made me uneasy, especially at night. The factory is a huge brick building with boarded-up windows and broken metal fencing that sags into the weeds. I could see where rain had stained the bricks over the years, leaving dark streaks that looked like black tears running down the walls. Pieces of glass and rusted metal littered the ground, glinting faintly under my headlights. I kept driving past it, trying not to think about it too much, just focused on getting to the gas station. Then out of nowhere, my car jerked hard to the left. My steering wheel felt loose, like it wasn't connected to anything. I pressed the brakes, and the whole car started to shudder. I managed to pull over to the side of the narrow road just before it curved around the back parking lot of the mill. I sat there for a few seconds with my heart pounding, staring at the dash lights. My check engine light was on, and so was the little tire warning symbol. I got out, and as soon as I saw the front left tire, my stomach dropped. It was completely flat, almost off the rim. I don't know what I ran over, but it shredded the rubber pretty bad. The first thing I thought was that I was lucky it didn't blow out on the main road where cars drive fast. The second thing I thought was that I was stuck here alone in the dark. I opened the trunk and pulled out the spare. It's one of those skinny little donuts that you can only drive short distances with. I grabbed the jack and started lifting the car. The air felt damp and heavy, and there was this faint smell of rot coming from somewhere nearby, probably the piles of trash and dead weeds. I could hear crickets and frogs making their noises in the distance. I tried to focus only on the task in front of me. Loosen the bolts, remove the flat, put the donut on, tighten everything, and get the hell out. When I got the flat tire off, I heard a noise coming from behind me. It was faint, almost like fabric dragging on concrete. I told myself it was probably an animal rooting through trash. I didn't look back. I just kept working, but I could feel my chest getting tight. My ears felt hot, and the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I slid the donut onto the bolts and started screwing the nuts on by hand as fast as I could. That dragging sound came again, but this time closer. It was followed by a quiet metallic clink, like something metal brushing against the ground. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tightened the nuts with the wrench until my hands hurt, lowered the jack, and threw everything back in the trunk without arranging it properly. I just wanted to leave. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the car. My headlights lit up the road ahead. The narrow street curved left, following the back edge of the factory fence. As I drove slowly around the bend, my lights swept across the chain-link fence and the weed-choked loading dock beyond it. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Near one of the open loading bay doors stood a man. At least I think it was a man. He was tall and thin, wearing dark clothes that looked dirty or stained. His head was shaved, and he was holding something long and thin in his hand, like a crowbar or a metal pipe. He wasn't moving at all, just standing there, half turned towards the fence, staring straight at my car as I drove past. I tried to keep my eyes on the road. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I told myself he was probably just a squatter living in the abandoned building. Nothing to do with me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something. I kept driving until the gas station came into view. When I pulled in under the bright lights, I finally let out the breath I had been holding. I felt a little silly for being so scared. I filled my tank quickly and went inside to pay, then bought a packet of chips and a cola for dinner because I was too tired to cook. On my way back out to the car, I glanced down at myself and saw my hands were trembling. Driving back home, I took the longer way that didn't go past the factory. My apartment complex was quiet when I pulled in. I live on the second floor. When I got inside, I threw my keys on the table, kicked off my boots, and collapsed onto the couch. My whole body felt drained. I ate my chips without tasting them, staring at the dark TV screen in front of me. I thought about that man, the way he stood there in the shadows holding that metal bar, watching me. I wondered what he was doing. Was he just there to scavenge for metal or copper pipes to sell? Or was he waiting for someone to break down on that stretch of road? I barely slept that night. Every creak of the floor above me, every gust of wind against the window made me flinch. I couldn't get that image out of my mind. The next day, I told my coworker about it during our lunch break. He said I was probably overreacting, that people squat there all the time, and it's just junkies or homeless guys looking for scrap metal to sell. But later that week, I saw a post online from a local news page. They found a car abandoned near the old mill. The driver's door was open, keys still in the ignition. The police were investigating it as a possible missing persons case. They didn't release any details about who it was or what happened, just that the car had been found there late at night. My chest felt heavy when I read that. I kept thinking about how flat my tire was, how shredded it had been. I wondered if it was really just bad luck. I wondered if someone put something on that road on purpose, waiting for a car to stop in the darkness. Since then, I've never driven past the mill again, even during the day. I take the longer way home no matter how tired I am. Every time I think about that night, I feel a tight knot form in my stomach. I keep imagining what would have happened if I'd taken just a little longer to change my tire. If my jack had slipped or I'd lost a bolt in the gravel, would I have seen him walking up to me with that metal bar in his hand? Would I have had time to get in and lock the doors? I don't know. And honestly, I don't ever want to find out. All I know is that there are people out there who don't need ghosts or demons to be terrifying. Sometimes the scariest thing you can see standing alone in the dark is another human being. Someone waiting for you to be alone, tired, distracted. Someone who sees your fear and doesn't care. Or worse, someone who enjoys it. That night changed something in me. Now I always check my tires before leaving work, even if I'm exhausted. I keep my phone fully charged. I keep a heavy flashlight under my seat, and I make sure all my doors are locked the second I get in. Because that night taught me a simple truth I wish I never had to learn. Real horror doesn't come with ghost stories or jump scares. It comes quietly, in an empty place, when no one else is watching. It comes when you're alone, and someone else decides they want you to stay that way forever. I never want to feel that fear again. But even now, years later, I can still see his thin shape in the shadows every time I close my eyes. And deep down, I know I wasn't just unlucky that night. I was lucky to get away. I woke up that morning feeling restless. It was my day off, and I didn't have anything planned, which bothered me. I always liked to keep myself busy because the quiet days made me think too much about life and where I was headed. So after lying in bed staring at the ceiling for almost an hour, I decided I needed to do something to get out of the house. I sat up, rubbed my face, and looked around my room. My phone was blinking with a few notifications, but nothing important. I threw on a dark blue t-shirt, old jeans, and my running shoes. I didn't even bother brushing my hair, just tied it back quickly so it wouldn't get in my face. I thought about going into town to grab breakfast, but the idea of sitting in a cafe alone with strangers around felt off today. Instead, I decided to go for a walk. There was a trail system about a 15-minute drive away that led into an area with old logging roads. I used to hike there often before work got busy. It wasn't an official park, just old roads winding through the forest, mostly flat, with some parts overgrown with grass and bushes. People went there to walk their dogs or ride dirt bikes, but it was usually quiet in the mornings. I grabbed my keys, locked up, and headed out. The drive was calm. The roads were empty, and the sun was already up, but the air was still cool. I parked my car near the gravel entrance and looked around. No other cars. Good. I preferred walking alone when it was like this. I stepped out and stretched, breathing in the clean morning air. It smelled like dirt and pine trees and dust. I started walking along the gravel road. Small rocks crunched under my shoes, and I could hear birds calling out from the trees. I kept my hands in my pockets and walked at a slow pace, feeling the sun on my face. After about 15 minutes, I turned down one of the narrower side roads. This part was less used. Grass grew down the middle of the old road, and small bushes poked out from the sides. As I walked, I looked at the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting thin moving shadows across the ground. It felt peaceful. After walking for a while, I stopped to drink some water. I had brought a half-full bottle from my car. I leaned against a tree and drank slowly, listening to the wind move through the leaves above. I wiped my mouth and put the bottle back in my pocket, then kept going. The road curved gently to the left, and I followed it. As I walked, I started noticing old pieces of metal in the grass. Rusted cans, bits of wire, what looked like old tools half buried under fallen leaves. It made sense. This area used to be used for logging, and old equipment often got left behind. I kicked at a rusted wrench with my shoe and kept walking. Eventually, the road ended in a wide clearing. It wasn't a clean open field, more like a rough area where trees had been cut down decades ago and never regrown. Saplings grew here and there among the tall grass, and old stumps poked out like broken teeth. I walked into the clearing and stopped in the middle, just looking around. It was so quiet here, only the wind and birds. I took out my phone to check the time. Just past 9 a.m. I thought about heading back soon, but something made me want to stand there a bit longer. Then, as I turned to look back at the road I came from, I saw movement along the tree line. My eyes locked onto it instantly. About 50 meters away, just inside the trees, I saw a man standing there. He wasn't moving, just standing still, watching me. I felt my chest tighten. I couldn't see his face clearly because of the shadows, but I could tell he was wearing dark clothes. My first thought was that maybe he was a hunter or another hiker, but something felt wrong. He wasn't walking along the trail or looking around. He was standing sideways, half hidden by a tree, like he was trying to watch me without being seen. I turned away and pretended to look at my phone again. My mind was racing. I didn't want to panic or do anything sudden. I tried to think rationally. Maybe he was just resting there. Maybe he didn't even notice me. I glanced back again quickly. He hadn't moved. He was still staring in my direction. I turned and started walking back towards the road slowly. My feet felt heavy, and every part of me was telling me not to turn my back on him. But I didn't want to look scared or challenge him either. As soon as I reached the road again, I started walking faster. The gravel crunched under my feet louder with each step. I didn't want to run yet. I kept telling myself he was probably just another hiker, but my gut said otherwise. After a few minutes of walking quickly, I turned my head to look back down the road. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I saw him again. He had stepped out of the tree line and was now standing in the middle of the clearing, watching me walk away. My whole body went cold. I turned around and started walking even faster. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to keep a strong pace. I kept glancing back every minute or so. For a while I didn't see him, and I started thinking maybe he had just been curious and left. But then, as I turned around one last time, I saw him again, this time walking along the road behind me. He wasn't running, just walking, but fast enough that I knew if I stopped he would catch up. My heart started pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I turned around and started running. The gravel was loose under my feet, and small rocks flew out behind me as I ran. I ran for what felt like forever, the forest rushing past me on both sides. My lungs burned and my legs started to feel numb, but I didn't stop. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running. I could hear my own breath coming out in short gasps, and the blood pounding in my ears. Finally, I saw the small gate at the entrance where my car was parked. Relief flooded through me, but I didn't slow down. I ran all the way to my car, unlocked it with shaking hands, threw the door open, and slammed it behind me. I locked the doors and sat there, breathing hard, looking out the windshield. The road behind me was empty. I couldn't see him anywhere. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. My shirt was soaked with sweat. After a while, I started the car and pulled out of the gravel lot as fast as I could without spinning out. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, but saw nothing. The road twisted away into the trees, and then the forest was gone. I drove all the way home with my hands clenched tight around the wheel. When I got back, I sat in my parked car for a long time, staring at the dashboard, trying to process what had happened. I kept thinking about the way he was just standing there, half hidden, watching me without moving. The way he followed me without running, just calmly walking after me like he had all the time in the world. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his shape in the shadows of my room. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I had stopped to tie my shoe, or if I had tripped on the gravel. I kept thinking about how quiet the forest was that morning, how alone I had felt, and how easy it would have been for someone like him to just wait for the right person to walk by. The next day, I reported it to the local sheriff's office. They took down the details, but didn't seem too concerned. They told me it was probably just a homeless person or a hunter passing through, but I could see in their faces they weren't going to do anything about it. After that, I never went back to those trails. I started walking in town instead, even if I hated the noise and the people around me. I never saw him again, but the memory of that day still stays with me. It wasn't that he chased me with a weapon or yelled threats. It was the way he just watched, like he was waiting for something, like he knew exactly what he was doing and had done it before. That cold patience scared me more than anything else, because it made me realize that there are people out there who don't need to threaten you openly to make you feel like prey. They just need to watch calmly with a purpose you can't see, and you will never know what they were truly planning until it's too late. Ever since then, every time I walk alone, even in busy streets or parks, I catch myself checking over my shoulder, just to be sure no one is following me quietly, calmly, patiently, waiting for their moment. Because now I know they exist. I woke up that morning feeling restless. It was my day off, and I didn't have anything planned, which bothered me. I always liked to keep myself busy because the quiet days made me think too much about life and where I was headed. So after lying in bed staring at the ceiling for almost an hour, I decided I needed to do something to get out of the house. I sat up, rubbed my face, and looked around my room. My phone was blinking with a few notifications, but nothing important. I threw on a dark blue t-shirt, old jeans, and my running shoes. I didn't even bother brushing my hair, just tied it back quickly so it wouldn't get in my face. I thought about going into town to grab breakfast, but the idea of sitting in a cafe alone with strangers around felt off today. Instead, I decided to go for a walk. There was a trail system about a 15-minute drive away that led into an area with old logging roads. I used to hike there often before work got busy. It wasn't an official park, just old roads winding through the forest, mostly flat, with some parts overgrown with grass and bushes. People went there to walk their dogs or ride dirt bikes, but it was usually quiet in the mornings. I grabbed my keys, locked up, and headed out. The drive was calm. The roads were empty, and the sun was already up, but the air was still cool. I parked my car near the gravel entrance and looked around. No other cars. Good. I preferred walking alone when it was like this. I stepped out and stretched, breathing in the clean morning air. It smelled like dirt and pine trees and dust. I started walking along the gravel road. Small rocks crunched under my shoes, and I could hear birds calling out from the trees. I kept my hands in my pockets and walked at a slow pace, feeling the sun on my face. After about 15 minutes, I turned down one of the narrower side roads. This part was less used. Grass grew down the middle of the old road, and small bushes poked out from the sides. As I walked, I looked at the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting thin moving shadows across the ground. It felt peaceful. After walking for a while, I stopped to drink some water. I had brought a half-full bottle from my car. I leaned against a tree and drank slowly, listening to the wind move through the leaves above. I wiped my mouth and put the bottle back in my pocket, then kept going. The road curved gently to the left, and I followed it. As I walked, I started noticing old pieces of metal in the grass. Rusted cans, bits of wire, what looked like old tools half buried under fallen leaves. It made sense. This area used to be used for logging, and old equipment often got left behind. I kicked at a rusted wrench with my shoe and kept walking. Eventually, the road ended in a wide clearing. It wasn't a clean open field, more like a rough area where trees had been cut down decades ago and never regrown. Saplings grew here and there among the tall grass, and old stumps poked out like broken teeth. I walked into the clearing and stopped in the middle, just looking around. It was so quiet here, only the wind and birds. I took out my phone to check the time. Just past 9 a.m. I thought about heading back soon, but something made me want to stand there a bit longer. Then, as I turned to look back at the road I came from, I saw movement along the tree line. My eyes locked onto it instantly. About 50 meters away, just inside the trees, I saw a man standing there. He wasn't moving, just standing still, watching me. I felt my chest tighten. I couldn't see his face clearly because of the shadows, but I could tell he was wearing dark clothes. My first thought was that maybe he was a hunter or another hiker, but something felt wrong. He wasn't walking along the trail or looking around. He was standing sideways, half hidden by a tree, like he was trying to watch me without being seen. I turned away and pretended to look at my phone again. My mind was racing. I didn't want to panic or do anything sudden. I tried to think rationally. Maybe he was just resting there. Maybe he didn't even notice me. I glanced back again quickly. He hadn't moved. He was still staring in my direction. I turned and started walking back towards the road slowly. My feet felt heavy, and every part of me was telling me not to turn my back on him. But I didn't want to look scared or challenge him either. As soon as I reached the road again, I started walking faster. The gravel crunched under my feet louder with each step. I didn't want to run yet. I kept telling myself he was probably just another hiker, but my gut said otherwise. After a few minutes of walking quickly, I turned my head to look back down the road. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I saw him again. He had stepped out of the tree line and was now standing in the middle of the clearing, watching me walk away. My whole body went cold. I turned around and started walking even faster. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to keep a strong pace. I kept glancing back every minute or so. For a while I didn't see him, and I started thinking maybe he had just been curious and left. But then, as I turned around one last time, I saw him again, this time walking along the road behind me. He wasn't running, just walking, but fast enough that I knew if I stopped he would catch up. My heart started pounding, so hard I felt it in my throat. I turned around and started running. The gravel was loose under my feet, and small rocks flew out behind me as I ran. I ran for what felt like forever, the forest rushing past me on both sides. My lungs burned and my legs started to feel numb, but I didn't stop. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running. I could hear my own breath coming out in short gasps, and the blood pounding in my ears. Finally, I saw the small gate at the entrance where my car was parked. Relief flooded through me, but I didn't slow down. I ran all the way to my car, unlocked it with shaking hands, threw the door open, and slammed it behind me. I locked the doors and sat there, breathing hard, looking out the windshield. The road behind me was empty. I couldn't see him anywhere. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. My shirt was soaked with sweat. After a while, I started the car and pulled out of the gravel lot as fast as I could without spinning out. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, but saw nothing. The road twisted away into the trees, and then the forest was gone. I drove all the way home with my hands clenched tight around the wheel. When I got back, I sat in my parked car for a long time, staring at the dashboard, trying to process what had happened. I kept thinking about the way he was just standing there, half hidden, watching me without moving. The way he followed me without running, just calmly walking after me like he had all the time in the world. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his shape in the shadows of my room. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I had stopped to tie my shoe, or if I had tripped on the gravel. I kept thinking about how quiet the forest was that morning, how alone I had felt, and how easy it would have been for someone like him to just wait for the right person to walk by. The next day, I reported it to the local sheriff's office. They took down the details, but didn't seem too concerned. They told me it was probably just a homeless person or a hunter passing through, but I could see in their faces they weren't going to do anything about it. After that, I never went back to those trails. I started walking in town instead, even if I hated the noise and the people around me. I never saw him again, but the memory of that day still stays with me. It wasn't that he chased me with a weapon or yelled threats. It was the way he just watched, like he was waiting for something, like he knew exactly what he was doing and had done it before. That cold patience scared me more than anything else, because it made me realize that there are people out there who don't need to threaten you openly to make you feel like prey. They just need to watch calmly with a purpose you can't see, and you will never know what they were truly planning until it's too late. Ever since then, every time I walk alone, even in busy streets or parks, I catch myself checking over my shoulder just to be sure no one is following me quietly, calmly, patiently, waiting for their moment. Because now I know they exist. I never really thought much about being alone at work. I always preferred working in empty buildings because it felt peaceful. Less chatter, fewer distractions. My job back then was as a cleaner for a medium-sized office building just outside the city. It was a bland 4-story place with white walls, gray carpets, and blue cubicle dividers, like any other office you could imagine. I worked there for almost 2 years, cleaning after everyone had gone home. My shift started at 6 p.m. and ended at midnight. Usually, I would finish most of my tasks by 10 p.m., but would stay till midnight to lock up and make sure everything was switched off. One evening in early winter, I remember it was raining heavily. The wind was loud, rattling the metal window frames. The building creaked a little in the wind, which it often did. I arrived at work, scanned my card at the glass entrance, and walked into the lobby, dripping wet from the quick sprint from the bus stop. The fluorescent lights flickered to life, humming softly. I could hear the rain hitting the large glass windows at the front of the lobby, tapping and drumming, the sound echoing faintly across the marble floor. I started my routine. First, I checked the bathrooms on the ground floor, mopped the floors, wiped down the mirrors, restocked paper towels. Then I vacuumed the lobby rug. After that, I made my way up to the second floor, wiping down desks, emptying bins, aligning chairs neatly, making sure no food wrappers were left out to attract roaches. The building was empty as usual. The only sounds were the wind outside and the occasional groaning noises the structure made as it settled in the cold. Around 8 p.m., I went up to the third floor. That floor had open cubicle spaces and 2 private glass offices at the far end. I remember cleaning one cubicle near the windows. The blinds were half open, and I could see dark clouds rolling fast across the sky, lit up by the dull orange glow of the streetlights below. As I moved to the next cubicle, I heard a loud bang from somewhere on the floor above me. It wasn't a sharp metallic sound like dropping a stapler. It was heavier, like someone had dropped a full box or slammed a door hard. I paused, straightened my back, and listened. The wind howled again, rattling the windows behind me. I waited for a few more seconds, broom in hand, heart beating a bit faster, but then shrugged it off. Maybe a maintenance guy had come in late, though I never saw them past 5 p.m. I continued sweeping around the cubicles. I finished the third floor by 8:45 p.m. As I walked toward the stairs to go up to the fourth floor, I felt my chest tighten slightly, like something was off. I ignored it. I always hated the fourth floor anyway. It felt darker, colder, even though it had the same layout as the other floors. Maybe because it was the top floor, and the roof above made it feel more exposed to the cold night air and noises of the wind. I switched on the lights as I stepped onto the fourth floor landing. The overhead fluorescents flickered rapidly before staying on, casting that pale bluish glow everywhere. There were cubicles here too, but at the far end was the big conference room with frosted glass walls and heavy wooden doors. I always cleaned it last. First, I went through each cubicle, emptying bins, collecting stray papers, and aligning chairs. I kept feeling uneasy for some reason. The rain outside was pouring down harder, and wind gusts were strong enough to make the glass panels creak. As I moved around, sweeping the carpet edges and pushing around my mop bucket, I kept glancing towards the conference room. Its doors were closed. I didn't hear anything from there, but my ears felt like they were straining, listening for something I couldn't name. At around 9:30 p.m., I finished all the cubicles. The only task left was the conference room. I walked over, pushed the heavy wooden doors open, and wheeled my mop bucket inside. The room was big, with a long, shiny table surrounded by 12 leather chairs. A large flat screen hung at one end of the room. The far side of the room had floor-to-ceiling windows covered with thick blinds. I always felt exposed in there, even though no one could see in from outside at night. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, but stayed on. I sighed and began by emptying the small bin near the door. As I bent down to pick it up, I heard something that made my chest feel tight instantly. It sounded like movement, like the quiet rustle of fabric brushing past something. I straightened up fast, staring around the room. The chairs were still, blinds unmoving. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing against my ears. I told myself maybe the building was just settling in the wind again. I started mopping the floor, working methodically around the chairs and table. My shoes squeaked slightly on the wet floor as I worked. I kept glancing at the blinds, half expecting to see a shadow move behind them. My hands felt sweaty against the mop handle. I moved around to the far end of the table, mopping near the windows, when I heard another noise that stopped me cold. It sounded like footsteps outside the conference room in the hallway, slow, heavy, and deliberate. My breathing sped up. I gripped the mop handle tighter, listening hard. The footsteps stopped right outside the conference room doors. The small hairs on my arms stood up. I didn't move for a while. My eyes stayed locked on the frosted glass doors. Through them, I could see vague shadows of the hallway light, but nothing else. The footsteps didn't come in. They didn't move away either. The silence dragged on so long that my ears started ringing. Finally, I forced myself to move. I squeezed out the mop, finished the section I was doing, and quickly wheeled the bucket toward the doors. My chest was pounding, so hard I felt dizzy. I opened the doors slowly, half expecting someone to be standing there staring at me. But the hallway was empty. The cubicles were empty too. I looked left and right, down the silent, fluorescent-lit hallway, feeling sweat dripping down my back despite the cold air. I wheeled the bucket out and closed the conference room doors behind me. I felt a strong urge to leave immediately, but I still had to put away the supplies in the janitor closet on the 3rd floor before I could lock up. I walked briskly to the stairwell, my wet shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor. As I reached the stairwell door, I heard another noise from down the hallway behind me. This time it wasn't footsteps. It was a scraping sound, like heavy wood dragging across carpet. I didn't turn around. My eyes were starting to tear up from holding my breath so much. I pushed open the stairwell door and rushed down the stairs, almost tripping over my mop bucket. My hands shook as I gripped the railings. On the 3rd floor, I parked my mop bucket inside the janitor closet and switched off the lights. I locked the closet and headed down to the 2nd floor, switching off lights as I went. My chest was still tight, my shoulders hunched up like I was bracing for something to grab me. I didn't hear anything else, but that was somehow worse. By the time I reached the ground floor, my shirt was damp with sweat despite the cold air inside the building. I walked through the lobby, switching off the last set of lights. The glass entrance doors showed the black night outside, streaked with rain. As I reached for the door handle to leave, I hesitated and looked back through the dim lobby. Everything was dark, empty, silent. But I felt eyes on me. My skin prickled all over. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the cold rain, pulling it shut behind me with shaking hands. The rain soaked me immediately, but I didn't care. I walked fast towards the bus stop down the road, not daring to look back at the silent, dark building behind me. My shoes squelched in the puddles, and my breath came out in cloudy bursts. I kept my eyes ahead until I reached the bus shelter. The street was empty except for the orange streetlights reflecting on the wet asphalt. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I got home that night, I went straight to my bedroom, peeled off my wet clothes, and sat on the bed for a long time, staring at the floor. I couldn't get the sound of those footsteps out of my head. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Like someone who knew exactly where I was and wasn't in a hurry. I thought about quitting the next day, but I needed the job. So I kept going back, night after night, but I never felt at ease again. Every creak, every gust of wind, every flicker of the lights made my chest tighten. About 3 weeks later, I found out what it was. The building manager called all cleaning staff for a quick meeting before shift one evening. He looked tired and tense as he told us the news. Apparently, security footage from the last few months had shown a homeless man sneaking into the building at night. He would slip in during the day when the front desk was busy and hide in the upper floors, sleeping in empty conference rooms or storage closets. He was mentally unstable, and when they finally caught him, he was carrying a large piece of metal pipe with him for protection. He never attacked anyone, but he had been walking the halls at night, checking doors, moving things around. Police took him away, and they changed the locks and increased security after that. Hearing that made my stomach turn. All those nights I thought I was alone, hearing footsteps, feeling watched, it was him. He could have been hiding behind any cubicle partition as I cleaned. He could have been watching me mop that conference room. He could have done anything he wanted in that silent building where no one would hear a scream over the howling winter wind. After that, I never worked alone again. I found another job in a factory with day shifts. I still clean, but now it's with dozens of people around me at all times. And every time I hear footsteps behind me at work, my chest still tightens until I see who it is, because I know how it feels to think you're alone when you're really not. I woke up before my alarm today. The sun wasn't even out yet. I could see the sky through the small window in my room. It was still dark, but had that early morning bluish tint. My eyes felt heavy, and my body felt sore from the work I had done yesterday. I just lay there on my thin mattress for a while, feeling the silence of the room. I could hear a cricket outside somewhere, chirping alone in the cool dawn. I pulled myself up and rubbed my face. My back cracked a little as I stretched. The old wooden bed creaked under my weight. I stood up slowly and felt the cold cement floor under my bare feet. I walked to the small washroom attached to my room. The tiles were chipped and cold. The bulb flickered once before staying on. I splashed some water on my face, looking at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked dull. My hair was a mess. I just stared for a while, thinking about nothing. After brushing my teeth and washing my face properly, I walked out of my room. The hallway was silent. I could hear the ticking of the clock in the living room. Everyone was still asleep. I didn't switch on any lights. I liked the darkness. It felt calm. I walked to the kitchen and drank some water. I felt it go down my throat, cold and clear. I stood there for a minute, just looking at the silent kitchen. The small stove, the fridge humming, the countertop with stains from teacups and plates. Everything was silent and still. I decided to go for a walk. I put on my shoes and stepped out the back door. The air felt cold on my skin, and I could see the mist hanging in the fields behind my house. I started walking down the small dirt path that led to the farms nearby. The path was muddy from the rain 2 days ago, but now it was just damp. My shoes left clear prints behind me. I could hear birds starting to chirp in the trees far away, waking up with the dawn. I kept walking down the path, feeling my legs warm up with each step. I walked past the tall grass that grew on either side, wet with dew. The sky was turning lighter now, a pale blue with hints of yellow. I could smell the wet earth, that strong, fresh smell. I liked it. I took deep breaths as I walked. I could see my own breath in the cold air. After about 20 minutes of walking, I reached the edge of the farmland. There was a narrow canal there with still, dark water. Sometimes I saw frogs sitting there or dragonflies hovering above the water. I stopped there for a while and sat down on a broken concrete block. I watched the water. It was silent and unmoving. I could see fallen leaves floating on it, barely drifting. I just sat there, staring at the water, feeling my body relax. I don't know how long I sat there, but the sky turned brighter. The mist started to lift. I decided to keep walking. I walked along the canal. The path was narrow, with thorn bushes scratching at my legs sometimes. I walked slowly, looking at the water, at the grass, at the small purple flowers growing near the banks. Then I saw something in the distance. It was a shape lying near the water, half in the grass, half on the path. I stopped walking. I squinted my eyes, trying to make out what it was. As I walked closer, I felt my stomach tighten. It was a dog, a brown dog, lying on its side. Its fur was wet and matted. Flies were buzzing around its head. I could see its ribs poking out. I stopped a few feet away from it. The smell hit me then, that rotting, sweet smell. I covered my nose and took a step back. The dog was dead. Its eyes were open, staring at nothing. Its tongue was hanging out of its mouth. I could see its teeth, yellow and broken. I felt sick. I turned away and took a few steps back. I didn't want to look at it anymore. I started walking back the way I came, my chest feeling tight, my stomach churning from the smell. I felt goosebumps all over my arms. I kept walking quickly, not looking back. The mist was almost gone now, and the sun was starting to rise. The sky was orange and pink, but I didn't feel calm anymore. My chest still felt tight. I walked past the broken concrete block where I had sat earlier. I didn't stop this time. I just kept walking. I could hear my shoes hitting the ground fast, crunching small pebbles under them. When I finally reached home, I felt like I could breathe properly again. I walked into the house, took off my shoes, and went to the washroom. I washed my face again, scrubbing hard. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked wide and a little red. I just stood there, breathing hard. After a while, I went to my room and lay down on the bed. I pulled the thin blanket over myself. I could hear the sounds of people waking up now. Cups clinking in the kitchen, footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing. But I just lay there, staring at the ceiling. I closed my eyes, but every time I did, I saw that dog. The way its ribs stuck out, the way its eyes were open and empty. I turned on my side and pulled the blanket over my head. I could still smell it in my mind. That rotting smell. I felt my stomach twist again. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I just wanted to forget what I saw. But I couldn't. Later that day, I forced myself to get up. I went to the kitchen to make tea. My hands were shaking a little as I poured the hot water into the cup. I sat by the small window, sipping it slowly, feeling the steam on my face. I tried to think about other things. The work I had to do today, the bills I had to pay, the things I needed to buy from the market. But my mind kept drifting back to that dog. I kept seeing its ribs, its yellow teeth, its empty eyes. I wondered how long it had been lying there. I wondered if it had died alone, if it had been in pain. My stomach twisted again. I felt a deep sadness in my chest. I didn't even like dogs much, but seeing it like that made me feel something I couldn't explain. It made me feel scared too. I don't know why. Maybe because it reminded me of death, of how quiet and lonely it looked, of how one day I would also die, and maybe I would also be lying alone somewhere with no one knowing or caring. The rest of the day, I stayed quiet. I did my work, cooked my food, cleaned my room, but I did everything slowly, like my body was heavy, like something was pressing down on my chest. I didn't talk to anyone more than I had to. I just nodded or shook my head if someone said something to me. My mind was somewhere else. At night, I lay on my bed, staring at the dark ceiling. I could hear dogs barking in the distance, their voices echoing through the silent streets. I closed my eyes and saw that dog again. Lying still, eyes open, ribs poking out. I pulled the blanket over myself tightly. I tried to think of something else, but nothing helped. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I woke up before dawn again the next day. The sky was dark blue, just like yesterday. I sat up slowly, feeling the heaviness in my chest again. I stood up and walked to the washroom, switched on the flickering bulb, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked dull. My hair was messy. My face looked tired. I splashed water on my face, wiped it with a towel, and just stood there for a while, listening to the silence of the house. I didn't feel like going for a walk today. I didn't want to see anything lying on the path again. I didn't want to feel that smell in my nose again. I just stood there in the bathroom, staring at myself, feeling my heart beating in my chest. It felt heavy and slow. I walked back to my room and sat down on the bed. I looked out the window at the sky turning lighter. Birds were starting to chirp. The world was waking up again. But I felt tired. I felt like sleeping again, even though I had just woken up. I lay down on the bed, pulling the blanket over myself, closing my eyes tightly. I didn't want to see anything today. I didn't want to feel anything today. I just wanted the day to pass. And that's how it was for the next few days. I woke up early, felt the heaviness in my chest, did my work slowly, spoke only when I had to, and spent the evenings sitting alone by the window, staring at nothing. I didn't go for walks anymore. I didn't want to see what else was out there. I just wanted to stay inside, where it was silent and safe. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dog. Its empty eyes staring at me, its ribs poking out, the flies buzzing around its head. And I felt that tightness in my chest again, that heaviness that didn't leave. I woke up that morning feeling restless for no real reason. The sun hadn't even come up yet, and the air in my room felt heavy. I stared at the ceiling for a while before deciding I might as well start my day early. I slipped out of bed, feeling the cold floor under my feet, and walked to the window. Everything outside was dark and silent, except for a few faint cricket sounds coming from somewhere down the street. I made myself some coffee and sat by the window, looking at the streetlights flickering a bit in the early morning breeze. I always liked the quiet of the mornings before people started heading out for work, before cars started rushing down the road, before the whole city woke up. But that morning felt off, like something was weighing on my chest, and I couldn't tell what it was. By the time the sun started to rise, I had already changed into my joggers and hoodie. I decided to go for a run, even though my body didn't feel like it. I thought maybe some fresh air would clear up the weird feeling inside me. I stepped out and closed the door quietly behind me, locking it twice like I always did. The morning air felt cold against my face as I started jogging down the empty street. I passed by the row of houses that all looked the same with their lawns and mailboxes lined up perfectly. I turned left towards the small park that had a track running around it. The streetlights were still on, and the grass was wet with dew. I could hear birds starting to wake up and sing softly from the trees. It should have felt peaceful, but it didn't. I kept glancing behind me for no reason at all. I ran 3 laps around the park before heading towards the old industrial area on the other side of town. I didn't usually go there, but that morning I felt like I needed to get far away from everything. I passed by closed shops with their shutters down and windows covered in dust. There were old factories there that hadn't been used in years. Most people avoided going there, especially in the mornings, because there was nothing to see except broken windows, rusted fences, and piles of trash where people dumped stuff at night. I stopped near an abandoned warehouse to catch my breath. My chest burned from the cold air. The warehouse was huge, its walls covered in graffiti, the windows broken and dark. I leaned against a metal pole, feeling sweat drip down my neck despite the chill. The place smelled like old metal and rotten wood. I looked around and realized I had never actually come here alone. Usually if I was near this place, I was with friends riding bikes when we were kids. But now I was alone and grown up, and the place felt even bigger and emptier. I don't know why I decided to walk around the warehouse instead of heading back home. My legs felt heavy as I walked along the side of the building, stepping over broken glass and pieces of wood. The ground was wet and muddy in some places. I could hear dripping water somewhere inside the building through a broken window. As I kept walking, I saw an old door half open. It was metal with rust along the edges, and there was a long scratch mark near the handle, like someone had tried to pry it open at some point. I stood there looking at it, feeling that weird heaviness in my chest again, but curiosity won over caution. I pushed the door open slowly, and it made a creaking sound that echoed inside the empty building. The smell hit me first: dampness, mold, and old oil. The floor inside was covered in dirt and patches of weeds growing through the cracks. Light came in through the broken windows in thin beams, lighting up dust floating in the air. I walked in further, my footsteps echoing softly. There were old machines and shelves with broken boxes. Some pigeons fluttered up into the rafters, and their sudden movement made me flinch. I could hear my own breathing louder than anything else. I walked towards the back where there were some offices. Their glass walls were broken, and papers were scattered everywhere, yellowed with age. I stepped over a fallen chair and looked around. There was an old coat hanging on a rusted hook near the back door. It looked stiff and dusty, like it hadn't been touched in years. I stood there staring at it for a while, feeling an uneasy chill run down my back. It was like stepping into a place where time had stopped completely. I walked out of the office and back into the main factory area. There was an old metal staircase leading up to a platform that ran along the side wall. I grabbed the railing and started climbing. The metal felt cold and sticky from rust. Every step I took made the staircase creak and shake slightly under my weight. When I reached the top, I looked down at the whole factory floor. It was huge and empty except for the broken machines and old crates scattered around. As I was standing there catching my breath, I heard a noise that made my blood run cold. It was like a soft shuffle, almost like someone dragging their feet across the concrete floor below. I froze completely, holding my breath, and listened. The sound came again, slow and heavy, moving along the floor near the back where the offices were. My heart started racing, and I felt sweat forming on my forehead despite the cold air. I crouched down low, gripping the rusted railing, trying to see what was making the noise. I couldn't see clearly from where I was. The sun was rising, and light was coming in through the broken windows, but shadows covered most of the factory floor. I stayed there, not moving, my eyes fixed on the dark area near the offices. After what felt like forever, I saw movement. A person slowly walked out from behind a broken machine. He was wearing dark clothes, and his face was hidden by a hood pulled over his head. He walked with a limp, dragging one foot slightly behind him. Every step he took echoed through the empty building. He stopped near the staircase I had just climbed. My heart was beating so hard I felt sick. He stood there for a moment, looking around slowly. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something shiny. It was a small metal object. He held it in his hand, looking at it closely, then put it back into his pocket. He turned his head slowly towards the staircase and tilted it slightly, like he was listening for something. I pressed my back against the platform, trying to be as quiet as possible. He stood there for a long time, just listening. I could hear my heart thudding in my chest, and I was sure he could hear it too. Suddenly he turned and walked away towards the other side of the factory floor. I stayed crouched down, not daring to move. I could hear him shuffling around, opening boxes, moving metal parts. Every sound echoed loudly. It felt like the entire building was holding its breath with me. I stayed hidden on the platform for almost an hour. My legs were shaking from staying crouched so long, but I was too scared to move. Finally, I heard the sound of the metal door opening and closing. I waited another 10 minutes before I stood up slowly and looked around. The factory floor was empty again. There was no sign of him anywhere. I climbed down the staircase slowly, holding the railing tightly because my legs felt numb. I walked as quietly as I could across the concrete floor, stepping over broken parts and avoiding anything that might make a noise. When I reached the door, I pushed it open just enough to peek outside. The street was empty. The sky was bright now with the morning sun shining down, making the broken glass sparkle on the ground. I stepped out and walked away from the building as fast as I could without running. My hands were shaking, and my chest hurt from holding my breath so long. When I reached the main road, I finally stopped and looked back. The warehouse stood there silent and empty, the rusted door hanging slightly open. It looked harmless in the daylight, like just another old abandoned building. But I knew what I had seen. I walked back home with my head down, feeling every crack and stone under my shoes. I kept looking behind me every few minutes, but there was no one there. When I reached my house, I unlocked the door and stepped inside, locking it twice behind me. I walked straight to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still trembling, so much that I spilled some on the counter. I sat down at the table and stared at the glass in front of me. My chest still felt heavy, but now it was mixed with relief that I was home and safe. I thought about the man in the warehouse, about how he didn't look like he belonged there, about the way he stood listening for sounds. I didn't know who he was or what he was doing there, but I knew I never wanted to find out. Later that day, I went online and searched for news about the warehouse or that area, but there was nothing. No crimes reported, no arrests, nothing at all. It was like he didn't exist. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the lights on, listening to every sound outside my window, every car that passed by, every dog that barked in the distance. The next morning I decided I would never go near that place again. I went for my run but stayed close to the neighborhood, running around the park instead. Every time I passed by a tree or bush, I felt like someone was watching me. That feeling stayed with me for days, even weeks. I kept remembering how quietly he moved, how he stood there listening, how he pulled out that small shiny object from his pocket. I didn't know what it was, but something told me it wasn't anything good. I never told anyone about what I saw. Even now, when I think about it, my chest tightens up. It was just a normal morning, just a normal run, but it changed the way I felt about going out alone. That heavy feeling I woke up with that day never really left me. Sometimes you don't need to see anything supernatural to feel real fear. Sometimes just knowing that someone was there, someone you weren't supposed to see, someone who might have been waiting for the wrong person to walk in. That's enough to keep you awake at night, staring at your locked door until the sun comes up again. I woke up before the sun even started to rise. My alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning, and it took me a few minutes just to remember why I had set it that early. Then it came back to me. I had promised myself I would go for a run before work today. I didn't feel like it, not at all. I lay in bed for another 5 minutes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence in my small apartment. I could hear the low hum of the fridge from the kitchen. The air felt cool on my face. I wanted to just roll over and sleep for another hour, but I knew if I did that, I would feel worse about myself the rest of the day. I forced myself up. My knees cracked as I sat up on the edge of the bed. I rubbed my face hard with both hands, trying to wake up properly. My room was dark except for the faint orange glow from the streetlights outside coming through the blinds. I could see the pile of clothes on the chair across the room. I got up, put on my running shorts and my old gray t-shirt, tied my running shoes, grabbed my phone and headphones, and left my apartment quietly. The hallway was silent. Nobody else was up at that time. It felt strange to be leaving for a run when everyone else was sleeping. Outside, the air felt cooler than I expected. I could feel the breeze on my arms. The street was completely empty. There were no cars passing by, just the dim yellow lights along the sidewalks. I did some light stretching near the curb, feeling my hamstrings tighten as I bent forward. I put in my headphones, but didn't play any music yet. I just wanted to hear the quiet of the morning for a few minutes. I started running at a slow pace. My shoes made soft thuds on the concrete. I could hear my breathing louder than anything else. I ran past the closed shops with their metal shutters pulled down. I passed a small bus stop with an empty bench. The only other person I saw was an old man walking his dog far ahead of me. I kept running down the street, past the bank building and the pharmacy. After about 15 minutes, my body started warming up properly, and I picked up the pace. I decided I would run all the way down to the river trail. I rarely ran there alone, but it felt like a good idea today. The sun was just starting to bring a faint gray light to the sky. I reached the turn that led to the river trail. There was a small path that went down a slight slope with tall bushes on each side. The river trail was about 5 miles long, stretching alongside the slow, muddy river that cut through the edge of town. It was surrounded by trees, bushes, and patches of wild grass. It was used by cyclists, walkers, and runners during the day, but at this hour it was empty. I slowed down for a moment and took a few deep breaths before entering the trail. It felt colder there. The trees blocked what little light was coming in from the sky. I could hear the river flowing slowly on my right side. The smell of wet dirt and grass was strong in the cold morning air. I kept running at a steady pace. My shoes crunched over small pieces of gravel scattered along the path. I could hear birds waking up and making short chirping sounds from somewhere high up in the trees. After a while, I reached a section of the trail that was completely covered by tree branches hanging low overhead. It felt darker there. The air felt damp, and I noticed my arms had goosebumps. I checked behind me once, just out of habit. No one was there. The trail was empty in both directions. I kept running, trying to focus on my breathing, trying to ignore how dark it felt under those trees. About half a mile later, I saw something ahead on the trail. At first, I thought it was just a fallen branch. As I got closer, I realized it was a bicycle lying on its side, blocking half of the trail. It was an old mountain bike. The tires were muddy, and the chain looked rusted. I slowed down and stopped a few feet away from it. I looked around to see if there was anyone nearby. I listened carefully. All I could hear was the river and the birds. I scanned the bushes and the path ahead, but didn't see anyone. I felt uneasy. I walked around the bike and kept running, but now my senses felt more awake. I kept glancing to my sides and behind me every now and then. The sky was getting lighter, but the trail still felt dark under the trees. My breathing felt heavier. I kept running for another 15 minutes until I reached a small wooden bench by the river. I stopped there, bent down with my hands on my knees, breathing hard. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. I felt a tightness in my chest that wasn't just from running. After a few minutes, I stood up straight and took a sip of water from my bottle. I looked around again. The trail was still empty. I turned to head back the way I came. As I ran back, I felt that uneasy feeling grow stronger. My ears felt sensitive to every small sound. Birds flying out of trees, branches creaking, the sound of water against rocks. I was about 5 minutes away from where I had seen the bike when I noticed something in the bushes on my left. At first, it was just movement. I kept running, trying not to look too obviously, but I could feel my skin crawl. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps on dry leaves, matching my pace. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a dog, but the footsteps sounded too heavy and too controlled. I sped up, and the footsteps sped up too. I felt panic rising in my chest. My breathing turned into shallow gasps. I could hear the footsteps coming closer to the trail. I wanted to look, but I was too scared to turn my head fully. I kept running faster and faster, my feet slamming on the concrete path. Then I saw the bike again, lying there just like before. As I ran past it, I finally turned my head to look behind me. For a second, I didn't see anything. Then I saw a person step out onto the trail from the bushes. He was wearing dark clothes. He was thin, tall, and his face was hidden under a dark hood. He wasn't running. He just stood there, watching me run away. My stomach twisted with fear. I kept running without looking back again. My chest burned. My legs felt like they would collapse any moment, but I kept pushing myself. I just needed to get back to the main road. I kept repeating that in my head over and over. The trail felt like it was stretching on forever. Finally, I saw the turn up ahead that led back up to the street. I didn't stop running until I reached the sidewalk. I turned around and looked back down the trail. There was no one there. The path was empty. The sun had started rising properly now. Everything looked calm and normal under the morning light. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to calm myself down. My heart felt like it was punching my chest from the inside. I checked the time on my phone. It was only 6:15 in the morning. I had run for almost 2 hours. I walked slowly back home, looking over my shoulder every few seconds. Every person I passed on the way back looked normal, going about their morning routines. Cars were starting to fill the streets. Shops were opening, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of that man standing there in the middle of the trail, hidden under his hood, just watching me. When I got home, I locked the door behind me and sat down on the floor of my kitchen, still in my running clothes. I felt my whole body shaking with leftover adrenaline. I thought about calling the police, telling them someone was lurking on the trail, but I didn't even know what I would say. He didn't do anything, I kept telling myself. He didn't touch me, didn't say anything, didn't run after me. But deep inside, I knew he was there for a reason. The way he hid in the bushes, and the way he matched my pace through the leaves told me he wasn't out for a morning walk. I sat there for almost an hour, just listening to the normal sounds of my apartment. The fridge humming, cars passing by outside, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Everything felt normal, but I didn't feel normal anymore. Later that day, when I went to work, I kept thinking about him. What if I hadn't run fast enough? What if he had stepped out sooner, blocking my path? What if he had a knife? Those thoughts kept spinning in my head over and over. I realized that I never wanted to run that trail alone ever again. I realized that early morning isn't as safe as people say. I realized that the world has people in it who hide in bushes at 5 in the morning, waiting for someone to come running by alone. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up every hour, thinking I heard footsteps outside my apartment door. I kept checking the locks. I kept looking out the peephole, seeing nothing but the dark hallway. But I couldn't stop thinking about how easily he could have followed me home if he wanted to. The next morning, I didn't go for a run. I sat by my window drinking coffee, staring down at the street, watching people walk by, and wondering which one of them might be just like him. Since that day, I haven't run alone in the dark again. I stick to the main roads with streetlights and other runners. But every time I see a man wearing a dark hood, I feel my throat tighten and my chest feels heavy. I keep thinking about that morning, about the bike on the trail, about the footsteps in the bushes, about the thin man watching me as I ran away. I know that if I had stopped running, if I had tripped, if I had paused to tie my shoe or catch my breath, I wouldn't be sitting here writing this down. I would be just another news story about an early morning jogger who never came home. That thought stays with me every single day. I woke up early that day. The sun was just coming up and the sky had that dull blue color before the heat settled in. I was planning to spend the day out on the river. I had packed up my fishing gear the night before, set my small aluminum boat on the trailer, checked the motor, fuel tank, and my tackle box. It was Saturday, and I wanted a full day away from people. The week had been long, and my mind felt heavy. I just needed to sit by myself, hear the soft splash of water against the hull, and breathe. By 6 a.m., I was already at the boat ramp. There was no one else around. The water was still and dark, reflecting the early morning trees in perfect shapes. I backed my trailer down, unstrapped the boat, and slid it into the water. I parked my truck up the dirt lot and walked back down. As soon as I pushed away from shore, I felt better. The small outboard motor hummed lightly behind me as I cruised up the river. There was a small bend I liked to go past where the trees grew thick over the water, shading everything beneath. It felt like a hidden tunnel sometimes, the way the branches met overhead. I killed the motor when I reached my spot, letting the boat drift a little until it settled against the bank. I tied it off to a tree root sticking out, set up my rod, and cast my line. It landed with a plop and little ripples spread out, disappearing under the low shadows of the branches. I leaned back, resting my elbows on the sides of the boat, listening to birds calling each other across the water. Everything smelled damp and earthy. Fish jumped now and then, small splashes echoing across the wide river. I sat there for hours. The sun rose up and burned off the morning chill. My bottle of water felt warm by noon. I kept casting and reeling, moving spots around the bend. I caught 2 medium bass and put them in the small cooler I had with ice. Around 2 in the afternoon, I started feeling hungry. I opened up the bag of sandwiches I had packed, simple peanut butter ones, and ate slowly, enjoying the quiet. That quiet broke around 3. I had just cast my line again when I heard a rustle in the bushes up the bank. I looked over my shoulder. The bank was steep here, with exposed tree roots and dark earth showing where the water had washed away the mud over time. I thought it might be a deer or maybe a raccoon. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. But then I heard the sound again, louder, not like an animal stepping softly through leaves. It sounded like someone slipping or tripping, like shoes scraping dirt and twigs cracking under hard weight. I felt a cold tightness in my stomach. I kept my rod still and stared at the bank. The branches were thick and drooping. I couldn't see anything up there. The sound stopped. The air felt hot and heavy. I tried to breathe slow and calm myself down, telling myself it was just a deer. After a minute, I went back to my fishing, though I kept glancing up at the bank now and then. The feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the line and the quiet gurgle of water against the boat. Half an hour passed with no more sounds. I started to relax again, telling myself I was overthinking things. I decided to move downstream a bit, closer to where the river widened before heading back towards the boat ramp later in the evening. I untied the rope and started the motor. As I pulled away from the bank, I looked back one last time and thought I saw something dark moving between the trees. My heart beat faster for a second, but I couldn't make out any shape clearly. The shadows were long now, with the sun dipping behind the trees. I shook my head and turned away, telling myself it was nothing. I drifted down about half a mile and anchored near some fallen logs sticking out of the water. I cast again and again, catching a small bluegill and tossing it back. The feeling of being watched still itched at the back of my mind. The shadows deepened around me. The river turned a dark greenish black, only reflecting the orange patches of evening sky between the tree branches. The air smelled thicker now, mixed with rotting leaves and mud. Around 6, I decided to call it a day. I packed up my rods and tackle, wiped my hands on my jeans, and sat there for a minute just listening to the frogs starting up along the banks. The motor took a few pulls to start, but it finally kicked in. I turned the boat around and started heading back upriver, keeping near the center where the current was smoothest. About halfway back, I saw something up ahead in the water. It looked like a fallen branch at first, but as I got closer, I realized it was bigger than that. It was almost as wide as the boat, dark and half submerged. I slowed down and drifted closer. My heart thudded as I realized it was an old canoe, turned upside down, wedged against a submerged log. It looked like it had been there for a long time. The wood was dark and rotting. One end was cracked open. Thick green moss grew along the sides. I steered around it carefully. As I passed, I glanced down into the water, trying to see if there was anything trapped underneath it. The water was too dark. It felt eerie seeing that old canoe sitting there rotting away, hidden from the world. I wondered who it had belonged to, if they had lost it in a storm or just abandoned it. The thought gave me goosebumps. I sped up a little after that, wanting to get back to the ramp before it got too dark. When I reached the ramp, the sun had fully set behind the trees. The sky was a mix of dull purples and grays. Crickets were chirping all around. I backed up the trailer, pulled the boat in, strapped it down, and walked around checking everything twice. I felt jumpy. The feeling of being watched still hadn't left. As I drove out of the lot, my headlights swept across the empty dirt area and into the thick tree line. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something standing between 2 trees, tall and human-shaped. I blinked and it was gone. My chest tightened. I kept driving, telling myself it was a trick of light and shadow. On the road back, I kept checking my rearview mirror. Every time my eyes met the empty road behind me, a chill ran through my shoulders. By the time I got home, it was past 8. I unhooked the boat and parked it behind the garage, went inside, and locked all the doors. I sat down on my couch, turned on the small lamp beside it, and stared at the blank TV screen. My hands felt cold, even though it was still warm outside. I thought about the sounds on the bank, about that old canoe half sunk in the river, about the shape I thought I saw between the trees at the boat ramp. My mind kept playing tricks on me. imagining someone out there right now, standing in the dark woods, staring at my house. I tried to shake it off. I stood up, made myself some instant noodles, and ate quickly, barely tasting anything. When I went to bed that night, I locked my bedroom window and pulled the curtains shut tight. I lay there in the dark, listening to the ceiling fan click with every slow turn. My ears felt sharp, picking up every sound outside. The wind in the trees, a dog barking far away, a car passing down the road. My eyes kept flicking towards the window, expecting to see a face staring back at me through the glass. I didn't sleep much. When the sun finally rose the next morning, I got up feeling exhausted. I made coffee and sat on the back steps looking out at the boat. The morning was quiet and bright. Birds chirped. Everything looked normal again. I tried to tell myself there was nothing to be afraid of, that I had just let the isolation of the river and the shadows of the woods get to me. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there watching me all along. And maybe they still were, somewhere in those trees, waiting for me to come back. That thought sat heavy in my chest as I drank my coffee. I told myself I wouldn't go back to that bend in the river for a while. Just the idea of drifting under those thick branches again, with no one else around for miles, made my hands sweat. I went inside, washed my mug, and tried to focus on the rest of my day. But that heavy feeling never really went away. Even now, whenever I think about that quiet bend of the river, all I feel is a cold emptiness in my chest, as if something is still waiting there, hidden under the shadows, watching for anyone who drifts too close. I still remember that November more clearly than anything else in my life. The days were getting shorter, evenings cold and silent, and our old wood-framed house creaked with every gust of wind blowing down from the hills behind us. We lived on the edge of town where houses were sparse, just a few scattered neighbors around. I was working a simple office job back then, living with my parents to save money. My life was quiet. My only real escape was my art, my mystery books, the music I played in my basement room, and the time I spent online reading about different philosophies, religions, history, anything that kept my mind busy. My younger brother had always been more social than me. He had friends coming in and out all the time. One of them invited him to a weekend camp that November. He left on Friday evening with a bored wave, dragging his old duffel bag down the driveway, and came back Sunday afternoon with a completely different look in his eyes. He wouldn't stop talking about how he found God, how he felt reborn, how the pastor said we all needed to open our eyes before it was too late. I thought it was weird but harmless. Kids find things to believe in all the time. But a week later, Dad went to one of their open meetings to see what all the fuss was about. When he came back, his face was lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years, like someone just handed him a purpose after a long life of repetition. Mom followed the next week, saying she felt something lift off her shoulders when she sat in the church hall and prayed with them. Suddenly, our living room was filled with folded pamphlets about salvation, Bibles stacked on the coffee table, and little printed quotes stuck with tape to the bathroom mirror. Our quiet home smelled like melted candle wax and oil most evenings. My parents began holding prayer meetings at the dining table, with soft piano hymns playing on Dad's ancient laptop. They threw out movies they deemed sinful. I came home one evening and saw my DVD shelf half empty, with my horror movies and psychological thrillers gone. Mom said she burned them because they were not Christ-like. It felt like I was living in someone else's house. My brother spent his time reading his small pocket Bible and texting friends about upcoming prayer nights. At first, I stayed quiet. I had no issue with them finding peace in religion, but everything felt so sudden, so forced. I could tell they were disappointed that I wasn't joining them. Dad sat across from me one evening with his hands folded on the table, looking me in the eyes and telling me he prayed I'd see the light before it was too late. I just nodded, feeling uncomfortable. He was my dad. I didn't want to fight him, but deep inside, I was unsettled by how quickly their minds changed. Around that time, we moved my grandma in with us. My grandfather had passed away that summer, and Grandma couldn't handle the farm alone. She took the small spare room next to the kitchen. She was always quiet, sitting in her armchair with a crocheted blanket, her white hair pinned back, hands folded in her lap. Sometimes she'd watch my parents praying and smile softly. Other times she'd just stare at the wall like she was thinking about Grandpa. Then, one week after my parents' conversion, I began hearing the footsteps. My room was in the basement, down the narrow carpeted stairs, with a low ceiling and two small windows high up near the ceiling line. I'd lie in bed at night, scrolling through my phone or sketching, and hear what sounded like someone walking upstairs. Slow, careful steps, like someone pacing. It didn't scare me at first. Houses make noises at night. Heat expanding pipes, wood shifting, wind rattling the windows. I turned over and went to sleep the first few nights, thinking nothing of it. But then other things started happening. I was up late watching a movie on my small old TV with a built-in VCR. The house was silent except for the movie sounds and the occasional ticking from the heater pipes. Suddenly, the numbers on the VCR clock began flashing 666. I stared at it for a few seconds, confused, thinking maybe it was broken. Then it switched to 999, flickered a few times, and went back to normal time. I reached out, pressed a few buttons, checked if it was stuck, but everything seemed fine. I turned off the TV and sat in silence, the room feeling colder than before, a faint buzzing in my ears. The next morning, the stove clock was flashing 666 when I came up to make coffee before work. I stared at it for a while, feeling a sick tightness in my stomach. I pressed the clock button until it reset. Later that week, while my parents were in the living room with the prayer group, the TV began trying to switch to channel 666. We didn't even have that channel. It would flip to 66, then 6, then back to 66. I felt a strange anger rise in me. I shouted at it to stop, half scared, half irritated. The TV turned off immediately. Everyone in the room froze. My parents turned to me with wide eyes. My dad started praying loudly, pacing back and forth. Mom grabbed her Bible and began reading out verses. The church group gathered around, praying with intensity like they were trying to fight something they couldn't see. After that, my parents forbade anyone from touching the TV. They placed a Bible on top of it and dripped oil on the corners. But the TV would still turn on by itself. I'd be sitting at the table eating cereal and hear it come to life, the static noise buzzing from the living room. Mom would rush in and switch it off, mumbling prayers under her breath. Dad ignored it, gripping his coffee mug tight and staring at nothing, like he was thinking hard about what to do. A few days later, it started affecting my brother's stereo. During a prayer meeting, when everyone had their eyes closed, the stereo turned on at full volume, blasting heavy metal music, so loud the windows rattled. My brother's face turned white. He scrambled to turn it off, but the buttons wouldn't work. Finally, he ripped the plug from the wall, and the music died mid-note, leaving a painful ringing in my ears. The room was silent except for the sound of people breathing heavily, eyes darting around, some whispering prayers, others looking scared. That night, we went out to eat at the White Spot Diner in town because Mom didn't feel like cooking after the chaos. We sat there in silence, eating burgers and fries under the bright fluorescent lights, my brother picking at his food without appetite. When we came back, the kitchen candy dish was empty. The candies were arranged in a perfect cross on top of the stove. Just a simple cross, nothing upside down or broken. Mom cleaned it up without a word. Her hands shook as she dropped the candies back in the dish. She told everyone to go to bed early. Dad and Mom stayed up in the living room, reading their Bibles by lamplight while Grandma slept in her room, her bedroom door slightly open. I went downstairs, feeling tense, my shoulders sore from clenching all day. I lay on my bed, scrolling online forums about electrical glitches, reading theories about electromagnetic interference and faulty wiring. Anything to keep my mind grounded. I fell asleep around 2 a.m., the blue light of my phone fading to black as my eyes shut. When I came home from work the next day, everything in my room was torn apart. My sketchbooks were gone, my shelves empty, posters ripped off the walls, ceramic animal figurines smashed or missing, my movie collection gone. I ran upstairs and demanded to know what happened. Mom stood there with her hands clasped in front of her chest, her eyes red. She said the prayer group had come over during the day and helped her cleanse the house. They threw out or burned everything they deemed sinful or evil. My chest felt tight, my vision blurry with anger. 6 years of art, books I had since childhood, pieces of my life gone without my permission. I grabbed my phone and called a friend, asking if I could stay with them that night. I left without saying another word to my parents, my shoes crunching over broken ceramic pieces on my carpet as I walked out. I stayed at my friend's place that night, sleeping on their couch, the smell of their dogs for comforting in a way I didn't expect. The next day after work, I went back home to try and talk to my parents. I didn't want to leave things like this. They were my parents, no matter how angry I was. I called before arriving, told them I wanted to talk. They said okay. When I walked in, Mom hugged me tightly, whispering something under her breath that I couldn't make out. Dad stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder, his face solemn. Suddenly, people began emerging from the bedrooms, church members carrying little bottles of oil, holding open Bibles. They surrounded me, chanting psalms, sprinkling oil onto my clothes and hair. I shouted in surprise, stumbling back against the entryway wall. Mom kept hugging me, whispering, "Thank you, Jesus, over and over. My skin felt cold where the oil dripped down my neck. I tried to push her away, but her grip was iron tight. Then, the candy dish from the kitchen counter flew across the room and shattered against the far wall. The TV turned on at full volume, the static noise blaring so loud it hurt my ears. A framed picture of my parents fell off the wall and hit my brother on the head. He clutched his hair and whimpered. Pictures began falling off the hallway walls one by one, in sequence, like invisible hands were pushing them down as they walked towards me. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't scream. My chest burned with terror. I tore away from Mom's grip, bolted down the hallway, down the basement stairs, and up to the front door. As I reached the entryway, the large wardrobe that stood near the wall swung out violently, slamming into the bottom of the stairs and blocking them. I heard people screaming behind me. I yanked the door open and ran outside into the cold evening air. My lungs burned as I sprinted down the street, away from the house, away from the smell of oil and candles and old wood. I called my friend in tears, begging her to come get me. She arrived. I woke up late that day, feeling the summer heat already sneaking through my window before noon. The sun shined bright, lighting up the corners of my room that the old yellow bulb above my bed never reached. I could hear the quiet hum of cicadas outside, that endless summer buzz mixing with the faint creaks and groans of the old house as it settled on its foundation. The floors in my room were covered in carpet, but I could still hear the wood underneath shifting every now and then, like the building was alive and breathing beneath me. My mother had left early for work that morning, leaving her laptop on my small wooden desk near the window. There were no chores left for me that day. No grocery list stuck on the fridge with a magnet shaped like an orange slice. No reminder to vacuum the stairs or wipe down the sinks. Just the quiet house and the laptop waiting for me. I spent the first hour just lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun lazily, thinking about what I'd do online. Back then AIM was the only thing that mattered. MSN Messenger wasn't usable for me, and texting wasn't really a thing yet, so AIM was how I felt connected to the world beyond my neighborhood. Eventually I got up, brushed my teeth, tied my hair back into a messy bun, and dragged the laptop onto my bedroom floor. I sat on my knees at first, clicking around and opening the program, then got tired and sprawled out flat on my stomach, feet kicking back and forth in the air as I typed to friends about nothing important. I remember that day smelled like old carpet and warm wood, mixed with the light scent of shampoo still clinging to my hair from the night before. The window was cracked open a bit, and I could hear kids playing far down the block and the low whoosh of a car passing every so often. The hours drifted by in a comfortable haze. Sometimes I would roll onto my back and stretch, hearing my bones pop and crack, before turning back to the screen and replying to someone. My friend Melissa was telling me about her cat's kittens, sending blurry pictures from her digital camera. Another friend was ranting about her brother hogging their PlayStation. I didn't pay attention to the time until my stomach growled, and I realized it was already evening, the light outside dimming into a soft orange that made the shadows in my room longer and darker. That's when I heard it. The sound of a car turning into our gravel driveway at the back of the house. The low crunch of tires on stone reached up through the quiet, and instantly I knew who it was. My stepdad drove a burgundy Chevy Denali, and I could tell by the sound alone that it was him pulling in. My chest tightened. I rolled over and crawled to the window, pushing the navy blue curtain aside just enough to peek through. I saw it there, his truck sitting in the driveway with its deep red paint catching the last of the sun's glow. Panic flooded me. Even though my mom said I could use her laptop, my stepdad always hated when I touched anything that wasn't mine. He was the type who would make a huge deal out of small things, and I didn't want to get yelled at for something that wasn't even wrong. I quickly typed to my friend that I had to go. I remember my hands were shaking a bit as I told her I'd talk to her later and logged off AIM. My stomach felt tight, like I had swallowed a stone. I heard him set the car alarm, that little beep-beep sound echoing faintly up to my window. Then came the heavy footsteps up the wooden porch stairs at the back of the house. I could hear his keys clinking against each other as he fumbled with the lock. The door opened, and I heard it shut with a dull thud. The old house shook slightly under the sudden impact, the way it always did when someone closed a door hard. I could hear him drop his stuff heavily onto the floor in the den downstairs. I cursed under my breath, quickly folding the laptop closed and gathering up the charger and mouse. I was ready to take my scolding if it came. At least I'd be prepared to hand the computer over without excuses. My feet made no sound against the carpet as I walked to the top of the stairs, but as I looked down into the dark hallway below, something felt off. The first thing I noticed was the darkness. Every light downstairs was off. The den was pitch black except for a sliver of blue-gray light sneaking in from the back window. I stood there gripping the laptop to my chest, breathing heavily. I told myself he just hadn't turned on any lights. He was like that sometimes, walking around in the dark because he knew where everything was. I swallowed and forced a small nervous laugh, shaking my head at my own fear. I took a deep breath and walked down the stairs into the darkness. The hardwood floor at the bottom felt cool under my bare feet. I could hear the quiet ticking of the old wall clock in the kitchen mixing with my own heartbeat. The air smelled like wood polish and dust. Sorry about using her laptop. I mumbled out into the darkness, hoping he'd be in the den. I expected him to grunt or scoff at me, but silence answered back. Complete, thick silence. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The den couch was empty. His work boots weren't by the door. His keys weren't on the small table where he always left them. Confused, my eyes flicked towards the window that overlooked the driveway. My heart jumped up into my throat. The driveway was empty. The Denali was gone. The porch light was on, illuminating nothing but the peeling white paint of the garage door. I felt a sudden burst of cold fear rise up through my chest, prickling across my skin like needles. If his car wasn't here, who had I heard come in? Who had slammed the door and dropped their things so heavily that the house shook? Thinking it might be a burglar, my first instinct was to check the back door. I rushed to it, fumbling with the lock. It was still secured tightly, deadbolt turned all the way. My hands trembled as I stepped away from the door, trying to keep my breathing quiet so whoever was in the house wouldn't hear me. My mind raced with thoughts of intruders, murderers, random drifters slipping into the house when no one was looking. I clutched the laptop tighter to my chest and ran up the stairs as fast as I could, taking them two at a time until I was back in my room. I shut the door, locked it, and sat down on the carpet, pressing my back to the cold wood. My breathing was ragged and tears were prickling at the corners of my eyes from panic. I set the laptop down and grabbed the cordless phone from the charger on my desk. That was when I heard it. At first, it was just faint creaking coming from downstairs, like the sound the house made when it settled at night. But it grew louder, heavier. I could hear footsteps moving slowly across the hardwood floor. They weren't light or cautious. They were heavy, deliberate, like someone walking in work boots. My chest tightened with fear. The footsteps moved from the den to the kitchen, then back to the living room. It wasn't just one person. I could hear two sets of footsteps, then three. One was stomping around, shaking the old wood so hard I could feel it vibrate through the floor under me. I pressed the phone to my ear with shaking hands and dialed my first friend's number. She was always on the phone, but I prayed she'd pick up. The line rang 3 times, then voicemail picked up. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I hung up and quickly dialed my second friend. Busy signal. I could hear the footsteps below growing louder, moving faster now like they were pacing or searching for something. My heart was beating so fast I felt like I might pass out. I dialed my third friend, the one I had been talking to online. Busy signal again. I remembered she was still logged onto AIM. My fingers trembled so hard that I dropped the phone onto the carpet. I snatched it back up and held it against my ear, listening to the dial tone as tears welled up in my eyes. Then the dial tone changed. Static crackled through it, loud and sharp in my ear. I froze. The static grew louder, filling my ear with its harsh buzzing. Then, through the static, I heard laughter. It was distorted, broken by the crackle, but it was unmistakable. Someone was laughing into the phone. I screamed and threw the phone down the hallway as hard as I could. It hit the carpet with a dull thump and slid to a stop near the bathroom door. The footsteps downstairs pounded louder, shaking the walls and floor so hard I could hear the picture frames rattling in the hallway. I sat there, knees pulled up to my chest, arms wrapped around them so tight my fingernails dug into my skin. I rocked back and forth, trying to think of what to do. I needed to call someone. I needed my third friend off the internet, so I could call her house. The only way to do that was to get back on AIM. But the laptop was dead in my room. The charger was still downstairs. My mind raced. The footsteps were moving towards the bottom of the stairs now, pausing there like they were listening for me. My heart pounded so hard it hurt my chest. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked my door and threw it open. I ran down the stairs, ignoring the loud creaks and groans under my feet. I could hear the footsteps in the den now, but I didn't look to see if anyone was there. I grabbed the charger off the couch and yanked it free from the wall, nearly tripping over the cord. As I turned to run back upstairs, I heard footsteps in the kitchen, the living room, and the dining room all at once, like there were people in every part of the house stomping around. I flew up the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. My legs burned from the effort. I ran into my room, slammed the door, locked it, and plugged in the laptop with shaking hands. It flickered back to life, and I logged onto AIM so fast I could barely type my password. I messaged my friend, begging her to log off so I could call. She asked why, but I didn't wait to explain. As soon as I saw her sign out, I grabbed the phone from the hallway where I had thrown it, shut myself back into my room, and called her house number. When she answered, her voice calm and casual, I started crying. I told her everything, every detail. The car in the driveway, the footsteps, the laughter on the phone. I asked her to listen with me, to tell me I wasn't crazy. Holding the phone tightly, I walked slowly towards my bedroom door and pressed my ear against it.